Check out the cool map of New Orleans, USA. See those bold gray lines around the city? Those are levees, keeping the city safe from the red flood coming in from Lake Maurepas, Lake Salvador, and Little Lake. Without those levees, New Orleans would be in big trouble with rising sea levels. Even with the levees, the damage looks pretty bad. The Biloxi and Jean Lafitte Wildlife Preserve look like they're almost underwater on the map. New Orleans is not the only city in the US that's at risk of going underwater. The city of Savannah is located right in the middle of Hurricane Central. But even without Mother Nature's fury, the place is facing some serious sea level rise. The Savannah River to the north and the Ogeechee River to the south might both overflow into the surrounding marshland. And that's not even the worst part. By 2050, there may be massive floods every year that will make history books look boring. Sorry to break it to you, but Miami is on the line too. The Sunshine State is shelling out around $4 billion to stop things from getting worse, especially in Miami Beach, a hotspot for tourists. As of now, over 1,200 houses are at risk of flooding. The Big Apple is also getting hit with more and more crazy floods. In November 2021, they even had their first ever flash flood emergency. But still, the city is not ready for it at all. Even the Statue of Liberty, one of the most famous spots in NYC, got messed up in Hurricane Sandy. Now with sea levels rising, Lady Liberty is in danger once again. Tabasco, Mexico is no stranger to flooding, thanks to its coastal location on the Gulf of Mexico. This low, flat state is covered in wetlands and forests and already deals with seasonal floods. But with sea levels rising, it could eventually be completely taken over by water. This would put at risk some seriously important things, like the Mayan ruins of Malpasito and Comacalco and Tabasco sauce. The sauce comes from Louisiana. Jokes aside, it's not just Tabasco. Parts of the Yucatan Peninsula and Baja California are also at risk from rising sea levels. Panama City is also in trouble. Apparently, the super trendy Casco Viejo and the swanky Costa del Este hood might get submerged in 2050, when Pedro Arias de Avila first founded it. Fun fact, it was the first European settlement on the Pacific coast. The 17th and 18th century forts on the Caribbean side are also in danger. According to Climate Central, they might get washed away by rising sea levels. Even UNESCO has had them on its risk list since 2012. Some more sad news. The Bahamas is going to be hit hard by rising sea levels. I mean, Hurricane Dorian was already a huge bummer in 2019. And now, they're saying most of Grand Bahama, Nassau, Abaco, and Spanish Wells could go underwater by 2050 due to various reasons. Amsterdam. The Netherlands is one of the Low Countries for a reason. The city and its buddies Rotterdam and Den Haag sit low and close to the North Sea. You gotta hand it to the Dutch though. They know how to handle the water and keep it at bay with high-tech flood defenses. With sea levels constantly on the rise, it looks like their impressive system of dikes, dams, barriers, levees, and floodgates is gonna get even more crucial in the future. Still, despite all the effort, some experts are afraid that the Venice of the North might go underwater by 2030. Well, this one is not something you would expect, but still. Venice is sinking by 2 millimeters every year, and the sea levels are rising. This means that the city is getting flooded more often, and it's only going to get worse because of climate change. Just like New Orleans, Venice has a flood defense system. But as the crisis gets worse, it's gonna be harder and more expensive to keep it going. Even worse, beautiful St. Mark's Basilica has already been hit hard by flooding. They tried to introduce a flood barrier system, but even that didn't work out perfectly. In 2020, the flood barrier was not used and St. Mark's Square got majorly damaged. Looks like even when we try to prevent the effects of climate change, things don't always go according to plan. In London, rising sea levels are causing more flooding along the Thames estuary, and it's not looking good. areas along the River Thames are especially at risk, putting iconic buildings like the Tower of London and the House of Parliament, as well as cultural hotspots like the Tate Modern and Shakespeare's Globe in jeopardy. And the British Museum? It has so much precious stuff, even Gollum would be jealous. We just can't let it go underwater. During your next Euro trip, make sure to add Bruges in Belgium to your list. Chances are you won't see it if you skip it this time. The thing is, it's also in danger of getting flooded. Bruges is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so we really hope they can protect it from any potential floods. Plus, it has a lot of nice local specialties we don't want to lose. You may not know it, but Andalusia in Spain is home to Western Europe's oldest city, Cadiz. It's been around for over 3,000 years thanks to the Phoenicians. But unfortunately, climate change is putting it at risk. Rising sea levels might flood the city's cobbled stone center, beautiful tree-lined plazas, and historic sea fortifications. And it's not just Cadiz. Parts of Andalusia are in danger of flooding too. Well, seems like one more destination must be added to your bucket list. Ho Chi Minh City, and especially its eastern marshy districts, are at risk, just like all the other places mentioned before. And it looks like the whole city is going to have a tough time with the Mekong Delta. While the main part of the city probably won't be completely submerged by 2030, flooding and storms are definitely going to become a big problem. So, it turns out that Bangkok might be in some hot water due to global warming. Literally, a 2020 study says that Bangkok could be one of the cities most dramatically affected by rising sea levels. It's sitting pretty low at just 5 feet above sea level. And to make things even more interesting, it's sinking at a speedy rate of an inch per year. And the cherry on top? The soil it's built on is super dense clay, which means it's basically a flood magnet. By 2030, parts of Bangkok, including the main airport, might have to get used to living underwater. The next city at risk is Kolkata, India. The fertile land in West Bengal has been a major key to their success for ages, but now it's causing some big worries in Kolkata and the surrounding areas. Just like Ho Chi Minh City, they could have some serious problems with all that rain during monsoon season. And the map of what could happen in 2100 is pretty scary stuff. The next destination is Shanghai, China. It's literally translated as the city on the sea, but it might actually end up under the sea. Climate control data is flashing red warning lights for this megacity, making it one of China's most at-risk cities. The Yangtze Delta, where Shanghai sits, and the Pearl River Delta, home to the Guangzhou, are both in hot water too, with lots of people living on low-lying land that might get flooded. The Maldives, a luxurious group of islands, already get flooded every year. Experts think they might lose 80 or even more % of their islands in the next 30 years. The Maldivian authorities aren't taking any chances though. They're already making plans to buy land in other countries, just in case they need to relocate the whole population.
Is the Big Apple getting a little too heavy for its own good? A recent study revealed that New York City is sinking. And get this, it's all because of those towering skyscrapers. Apparently, the whole event is called subsidence, which is when the Earth's surface settles bit by bit, or suddenly sinks. Soft sediments shifting and the weight of the city itself are the culprits behind this sinking sensation. Now, don't get too alarmed. The study found that New York is sinking at a rate of 0.04 to 0.07 inches per year. Sure, that doesn't sound like much, but there are parts of the city that are sinking even faster than that. This sinking situation could cause some trouble for the city, especially since it's already pretty low-lying and home to over 8 million people. So it's important that local authorities come up with some strategies to tackle the growing flood risk and rising sea levels. Although, I'm not sure building giant seawalls is the way to go. We might need to get a little more creative than that. Geologists want to make sure we're all aware that building more high-rises near the coast, rivers, or lakes could contribute to future flood risks. So we really need to think twice before we start constructing skyscrapers left and right. In recent studies, scientists calculated the total mass of all the buildings in New York City, over 1 million of them, and it adds up to a whopping 1.68 trillion pounds. Talk about a heavy load. Now, they didn't include the weight of the roads, sidewalks, bridges, and other paved areas, so you can only imagine how much more weight is added to the city. But hey, even with these limitations, the researchers did a pretty good job of accounting for the complex geology beneath New York, including the sand, silt, clay deposits, and good old bedrock. They found out that certain types of soil, like clay and artificial fill, are more prone to subsidence. On the other hand, bedrock stays pretty firm and keeps those skyscrapers in place. So at least we don't have to worry about the Empire State Building taking a dive anytime soon. Comparing their fancy models with satellite data, the researchers created a map of the city showing where the sinking is happening. And guess what? The increased urbanization and all that groundwater pumping and draining are only making things worse. It's high time we start protecting our resources, don't you think? I wouldn't start packing my bags just yet. New York isn't the only sinking city out there, you know. Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, is facing some serious sinking action too. In fact, parts of it could be underwater by 2050. That's like a real-life Atlantis situation. Over 30 million people in Jakarta are now deciding if they should relocate the entire city. If there's a city out there we should worry about sinking, that's Venice for sure. But why is it so eager to take a dive, you might ask? Well, let me tell you the complex truth. You see, Venice decided to set up shop on a marshy lagoon with shoddy foundations. As time went by, the ground underneath just couldn't hold it together and started compacting like a squished marshmallow. On top of that, the city's been slurping up groundwater like it's going out of style or something. The cherry on top of this mushy cake is that the sea levels have also been slowly rising. And guess what? Those sneaky plate tectonics are having a laugh by shoving the Adriatic plate under the Apennine Mountains, giving Venice an extra push downward. Someone had the bright idea to stop pumping groundwater, thinking they could stop the sinking shenanigans. But hold your gondolas. A new study revealed that the sinking hasn't completely stopped, just slowed down a bit. It turns out the whole area is tilting ever so slightly to the east, with Venice perched on the slightly higher end. You must be wondering how much Venice sinks in a year, right? Brace yourself for this shocking revelation. It's sinking at a rate of about 0.04 to 0.07 inches a year, similar to New York. At this pace, in the next 20 years, it could sink a whopping 3 inches below sea level. To avoid turning into a Venetian fishbowl, locals are frantically building special barriers to keep the water from crashing into the lagoon. But don't hold your breath, because this project has had more delays than you'd expect. Oh, and have you noticed that charming old-style vibe in Venice? It's not just because they're fans of the vintage look. Those salty waters have been wreaking havoc on the buildings, thanks to the water levels constantly breaching the original damp proofing. Now the water's cozying up to the masonry, and the ground floors of many apartments are no longer safe enough to live in. Now, when will Venice take a dive into the abyss? It's hard to say for sure. Subsidence and rising sea levels are as slow and unpredictable as a turtle in a marathon. But experts have playfully warned that if things continue as they are, Venice could be doing the backstroke beneath the waves by 2100. Fear not, though. They're doing their best to protect this floating gem of history and culture from becoming a Hollywood disaster flick. So don't cancel that Venice day trip just yet. New Orleans has a peculiar watery situation going on too. You see, this lively place was initially built just a smidge above sea level, and now it's gradually sinking. Back in the day, when an area of the city called the French Quarter was just popping up, folks had to make do with what they had. They scored the best land they could find, but it was only about 10 feet above sea level. And let's not forget, the rest of the city is as flat as a pancake, with the areas around the French Quarter being just a hair lower. Now, even though they knew they were up against some soggy odds, the resourceful New Orleans residents did their best to elevate their houses above the flood-prone land they chose as their home. There's more. The ground beneath New Orleans is as wobbly as a plate of Jell-O. Architects had to keep things short and sweet because they feared the soil couldn't handle the weight of taller structures. They played it safe, sticking to 2 or 2.5 stories. Here's where it gets interesting. The city installed a fancy drainage system in the 1900s, thinking it would solve their water woes. And while it did help with the marshes and all, it inadvertently sucked the life out of the soil. Yep, the ground was left high and dry, without enough sediment and water to keep it steady. As a result, those former marshes sank as if they were in a quicksand competition. By the 1930s, things got even more topsy-turvy. 1/3 of the city was below sea level, and by the time Hurricane Katrina made its grand entrance, that number skyrocketed to around 50%. Oh, and here's the icing on the cake. Sea levels decided to join the party, rising faster than a helium balloon. So now, not only is New Orleans sinking, but the surrounding area is also at various degrees below sea level. So what can we do about all these sinking cities? Well, for instance, we could manage our water consumption a bit better. We can't just keep sucking groundwater out of the earth like there's no tomorrow. We've got to find new ways to quench our urban centers' thirst. Think about it. We could purify surface waters, or even turn salty seawater into a sweet solution. Of course, we'll need a boatload of energy to make it all work. Speaking of great urban water management, let me tell you about a town in Denmark called Nye. These guys have got it all figured out. They collect rainwater and use it to supply their toilets and washing machines. Talk about resourcefulness. Now that's what I call a splash of genius.
Imagine that it's the year 2025, and our planet has completely changed. Rising sea levels, extreme weather, and the ocean becoming more and more acidic are just some of the problems people have been dealing with for years. But in one of the world's largest coastal cities, the situation has become too serious. It was a sunny day in June when a massive earthquake shook the city to its core. The ground beneath people's feet heaved and shook, and buildings swayed dangerously. People ran through the streets in panic, trying to find safety. But as soon as the ground settled, the inhabitants of the city realized the real danger. A wall of water, almost 100 feet high, was rushing toward the city, propelled by the force of the earthquake. The tsunami hit the city with unimaginable force. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out, and thousands of people lost their lives. But here's where things get interesting. In the aftermath of the disaster, the city's authorities realized that they couldn't just rebuild the city as it was before. They needed to be better prepared for the next potential disaster. And so they came up with an incredibly ambitious project to build an underwater city. The goal was to create a self-sufficient, sustainable city beneath the ocean's surface that could withstand any natural disaster. The underwater city would be powered by renewable energy, using tidal power and underwater solar panels. It would be designed to withstand extreme weather and would have its own emergency response systems. The project attracted some of the world's top scientists, engineers, and architects. They worked tirelessly to design the city and carefully considered every aspect of the project. The underwater city would have everything that a typical city had, from schools and hospitals to stores and restaurants. There would be underwater farms where fish and other marine creatures could grow. The city would even have its transportation system, advanced submarines, and underwater tunnels connecting different parts of the city. The project became a shining beacon of hope for people. It showed that even in the face of disaster, we could come together to create something amazing. But as time went on, the project no longer seemed so perfect. The cost of the project turned out to be higher than planned. There were also concerns about how long such a project would exist. After all, the ocean is very unpredictable. And still, the team of scientists and engineers never gave up. After years of trial and error, they finally created the perfect underwater city, a marvel of engineering, a self-contained ecosystem that could sustain people indefinitely. The buildings were constructed from a material that could withstand the immense pressure at the bottom of the ocean, and the city itself was powered by a network of advanced hydroelectric turbines. It wasn't long before the first wave of colonists arrived at the underwater city. There were different people in this group, and each of them had their own reasons for choosing to live in this new world beneath the waves. Some were adventurers seeking a new world to explore, while others were hoping to escape natural disasters raging on dry land. But despite their differences, all these people shared a common goal: to build a new society, one that was in harmony with the natural world. The underwater city flourished, and new discoveries were made every day. The colonists developed new technologies and ways to tame the power of the ocean. They learned to farm the sea and started cultivating underwater gardens that provided them with a steady food supply. But living underwater was challenging. People felt isolated and even claustrophobic. The situation came to a head when a group of activists started to protest against the city's expansion plans. They argued that the underwater city was a threat to the environment it was meant to protect, and that the colonists should focus on reducing their impact on the delicate underwater life. The protests sparked a heated debate among the colonists. Some of them argued that the survival of the city depended on its growth and expansion. Others claimed that the city needed to prioritize the protection of the environment above all else. In the end, a compromise was reached. The city would continue to expand, but the main priority would be sustainability and a responsible attitude to nature. The colonists would do their best to reduce their impact on the environment by using new technologies and following strict conservation rules. And they would also remember the importance of protecting the ocean and its fragile ecosystem. Years went by, and the underwater city continued to thrive. New generations of colonists were born, and they grew up in a world entirely different from the one their ancestors had known. They never saw the world on the surface, but appreciated the beauty and complexity of the underwater world they called home. And as the years passed, the city became a symbol of hope for a world struggling with the devastating effects of climate change. It showed that despite all difficulties, people could come together to create a better world. It is a reminder that the future is not set in stone, and that we can build it sustainably and in harmony with the natural world.
Now, have you ever wondered about the longest time it rained nonstop? Even an hour of rain could be a big deal if you're hanging out in a dry spot like the Atacama Desert in South America. It can set a record for that place. But in super rainy spots like the Amazon rainforest, having 40 days of rain in a row might not even turn heads. Interestingly, we only have rainfall records where people live and keep track. Many towns and cities skip the whole rain data collection thing. Plus, there are so many places on Earth where nobody lives, like rainforests or the open ocean. So our rainfall knowledge is a bit patchy. Now, if we were to talk about records, Hawaii has a couple. People there have some seriously long rainy days, especially on islands where winds come from the mountains. From 1939 to 40, they recorded 331 days in a row with measurable rainfall. If you're a person who likes to watch the rain at home with a cup of tea, this might sound ideal to you. But we need to see the sun at least occasionally. Getting some sun is good for your body and soul. Obviously, you get vitamin D. Just 5 to 15 minutes of sunlight a few times a week can make a real difference. And have you ever heard the phrase sunny disposition? Researchers found that people feel down when there's not much sun around. Sunny days make us happier. Sunshine boosts your serotonin, which fights off bad moods. That sunny serotonin isn't just for your mood, it also helps you sleep. And it's also a heart assistant. When the sun hits your skin, your body releases something called nitric oxide, which chills out your blood pressure. Healthy blood pressure means a healthier heart. Now, go tell that to the people who had to go through 881 consecutive days of rain. Yeah, the record was set almost 3 full years of rain. This happened from 1913 to 1916 in Hononumomaki, Hawaii. It rained like there was no tomorrow because the region is a tropical rainforest. For 2 million years and completely reshaped the planet's destiny. At the end of the Permian era, around 234 million years ago, I wasn't around then, but I read about it, the Triassic period began, marked by the onset of an extended period of rainfall. This phenomenon is now called the Carnian pluvial event. Well, that's what they decided to call it. Recent studies, supported by evidence, suggest that it didn't reshape the planet in that sense, and that it was triggered by coal combustion. The rain wasn't continuous either. So we just debunked a myth here. Woohoo! Next, we have columnar jointing. This is the fancy term for groove patterns that form in lava flows, sills, dikes, and other rocky stuff. These lava creations come in all shapes and sizes. Most are seen as straight, parallel columns. Some have curves and varying widths. They can be as high as 1,181 inches. I'll save you the math. It's roughly 98 feet. The columns are formed by pressure and the cooling process. As lava becomes cooler, it shrinks and forms cracks. Once a crack starts, the lava moves around. These cracks expand to the surface of the flow. Water sneaks into the cooling lava, making it chill down fast starting from the surface, leaving its mark in those patterns. Devil's Postpile in California is a must-visit place if you want to see columnar jointing. But hey, they're found all around the world. Let's raise our heads to the sky to see something magical. Fire rainbows, also known as circumhorizontal arcs, look like flames dancing above the clouds. To see these eye-catching arcs, you need a special cloud type called cirrus clouds and the sun at least 58 degrees high in the sky. It's a VIP collaboration between sunlight and clouds. Let's break it down further. Take London, for instance. It's around 51 degrees north. Now, sorry Londoners, no fire rainbows for you. Now we move to deep waters to see underwater crop circles. These are giant circular patterns found in 1995 near the shores of southern Japan. Locals were baffled. They dubbed them mystery circles, as if the ocean had a secret talent for sand art. The mystery was solved in 2011. The unlikely artist turned out to be a tiny pufferfish, just 5 inches long. The researchers found out that males were on a mission, spending a solid 7 to 9 days building their circles by swimming in and out and using their fins to carve valleys into the sandy floor. They decorate the peaks of their creations with bits of shells and corals, turning their sandy canvases into masterpieces. Okay, they don't do it for the sake of art. The curious circles have a purpose. The sandy center of the circle serves as a nest. Male swimming moves mix things up, getting sand particles just where they need to be. When a lady pufferfish swims by, the male twirls and dances, swirling sand around. If she is impressed and thinks he is the one, She lays her eggs in the sandy heart of the circle. There you go, another happy ending. Now, let's look at frost flowers. You might have seen thin sheets of ice that look like delicate petals and sometimes pop up from the stems of plants. The ice is about as thick as a credit card. It forms when the weather is cold outside. The soil is damp but not frozen, as well as plant stems. Not all plants produce these frost flowers, and the conditions must be just right. Here's how it happens. The water inside a plant stem gets pulled up from the ground. When it freezes, it expands and cracks the stem vertically. As it hits the chilly air, it turns into ice. As more water gets pulled up through the crack, it keeps pushing out super thin layers of ice. Whether a frost flower looks like a narrow ribbon or a wider one depends on the length of the crack. And the way it curls and shapes itself into these petals is random, or the reason might lie in the difference in friction along the sides of the crack. These frost flowers are unique and delicate, and they don't last long. They melt or just disappear quickly. To spot them, keep an eye out for tall grass, especially in places that don't get mowed much. Pay attention to purple ironweed, blackberries, and wing stems.
It was hot in the tropics, a type of heat unknown to the men aboard the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria ships, led by Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. It had been months since these men left their home cities in Europe, and until then, Europe was all they knew. They were given a difficult and even dangerous task. Spain hired Columbus to find a new western route to Asia. They needed new routes for trading and buying spices, but it was far from a simple job. I mean, crossing the ocean never is. Little did those sailors know that their lives were about to change forever. "Land in sight!" someone must have shouted on board. But when they finally stepped on that new foreign land, they discovered they were not in Asia. They had landed in the Americas. You've probably heard this tale before. Historically speaking, Columbus arrived in the Americas in 1492. But what would have happened if Columbus's ship had faced a lethal storm in the Atlantic Ocean and had never made it to the new land? What would today's history look like? First things first, nobody discovered anything. When we say that the Americas were discovered, we're kind of ignoring the millions of people who already lived there. You see, the Americas were only discovered from Europe's point of view. Columbus would only have discovered something if when he got there, he was faced with acres and acres of empty land. But that was not the case at all. Second, Columbus was not the first explorer to land in the Americas. Believe it or not, the Vikings approached American shores in the 10th century. Their expeditions have been well documented and accepted by scholars. Here's what might have happened. Around the year 1000 CE, Viking explorer Leif Erikson sailed to a place called Vinland. Cute name, huh? It's now a region in Canada called Newfoundland. But his crew didn't stay too long. They arrived to find 10 Native Americans napping under their overturned canoes. They attempted some trade, but I'm guessing the Vikings weren't too friendly and the Americans didn't really like them. The Vikings' account of the encounter shows they felt outnumbered and menaced, so they sailed away back to their land. That makes sense, right? As I said earlier, there were millions of people living in the ginormous continent of the Americas. Any foreigner would be outnumbered there. Now take a look at what North America looked like before our buddy Chris got there. It was not divided into the normal states we're used to. And if Columbus had never arrived, the United States would probably never have been united to begin with. After all, there were hundreds of first Americans living in these lands, and they lived amongst their own tribes, quite different from the Europeans. It's not accurate to think that there were no political systems going on in the Americas before Europeans arrived. We just need to understand that they were different from what we're used to today. When Europeans arrived, they imported their belief systems with them, from religious beliefs and language systems to things as simple as clothing habits. If the Americas had developed on their own, maybe their sense of fashion would be completely different today. You see, Europeans had a developed sense of fashion by the time they arrived in the West. They wore things such as this and this. But those don't really work in the tropics, do they? For them, fashion had to do with showing a certain economic status, while in the Americas, that didn't exist. For Native Americans, clothing was mainly functional and related to the weather. In warmer climates, Native people would wear short-like cloths to cover their intimate parts. They would walk bare-chested and use shoes known as moccasins. Yes, similar to the moccasins you probably own. In colder climates, they would resort to using leather and fur parkas. Of course, there was always the special clothing used for ceremonial purposes. So I'm guessing that if Columbus never reached the Americas, brands such as the Gap, Hollister, and Forever 21 would have never existed. But we could live with that, couldn't we? Here's a wild thought. Let's say that by the 1700s, Native Americans had developed complex engineering skills. They built big boats, maybe a bit smaller in size than the traditional European ships, and decided to venture across the ocean. Let's say they were the ones who arrived on European shores, in places such as Spain and Portugal. They carried gifts and goods with them for trading, of course. This was also a common practice amongst them back home, known as potlatch. Sure, they were received with suspicion by the Europeans, who had only ever traded with Asia. But with this inverted encounter, a different type of relationship began between Native Americans and Europeans. Since Europeans didn't claim ownership of the Americas, the people from the so-called New Land weren't considered inferior to them. Actually, they stood side by side as equals, each one with their own power and set of knowledge. Native Americans taught Europeans a new type of ruling system, a more decentralized one. So modern-day structures of government would look really different. Maybe Europeans decided that 4 years was a long time for someone to hold decision power, so they implemented smaller and more frequent elections. Oh, and the landscape of European cities also changed a lot. Instead of huge statues made of copper and bronze showing men in ships on their way to the Americas, the Europeans built totem poles in honor of their alliances with first Americans. In terms of medical and medicinal knowledge, they had a lot to exchange about. While Europeans were making advances in traditional medicine, Americans had developed an impressive knowledge of herbs that could heal a series of things. Before they knew it, Europeans were selling different varieties of plants in their pharmaceutical establishments. They had one big barrier though: language. Since Europeans never arrived on American shores, they also never taught their language to Americans. So maybe in this scenario, both cultures brought in their best linguists and tried creating a new language from scratch. Something that could be comprehensible from both perspectives and that could encompass both of their worldviews. The implications of this on modern-day life would be really profound if you stop to think about it. Let's say that this newly created language involved some symbols and drawings in it. You see, Native Americans often told stories using symbols known as pictograms. They were quite literal sometimes. As you can see, a mountain was represented by, well, a mountain. It's crazy to think that this system of communication has been around for 5,000 years, since it was actually invented by the Sumerians. And hey, maybe even our laptop keyboards would come equipped with these symbols, and you could write more visually hybrid and fun emails than the ones you write today. The American landscape would have also changed. You see, if neither Columbus nor any of the other European dudes that went after him reached the so-called New Land, Central and Latin American cities would look completely different than they do today. Maybe the bustling empires of the time, such as the Inca, the Maya, and the Aztec, would have grown immensely. To be fair, they were already pretty big by the time Europeans got there. Some pre-Columbian Maya cities were as big as medieval London and Paris in terms of population. But oh my, the Mayan Empire would have grown so much that it could have spread out all over of Central America. They could have developed their pyramid building craft up to the point that they managed to build an even larger pyramid than the Giza pyramid in Egypt. So tourists would come from all over the world to visit. Ah, and in South America, let's just say the region could have turned into a huge forest, bigger than the Amazon. The Inca could have spread through the Andes and then into the mainland. Places such as Brazil and Argentina never existed. But in their place, there would have been dreamy tropical settlements, which would have become a worldwide reference in sustainable living.
Picture this. You're floating about in the depths of space, gazing down on our blue marble of a planet. What's on top? You might think it's the North Pole, but that isn't necessarily so. The truth is, our collective belief that the North is at the top of the world doesn't have any solid scientific backing. It's just one of those things we've accepted over time. And this acceptance has a compelling history, with a dash of astrophysics, a bit of psychology, and a surprising twist. It influences how we feel about our world more than we might think. Figuring out where you are is crucial for survival, and that's true for most species, not just us humans. Similar to honeybees, for example, humans have a knack for creating mental maps of our surroundings. But where we really stand out is in our efforts to share these maps with others. We've been at it for a while now, drawing maps on anything from cave walls to computer screens. The earliest ones we've found date back to 14,000 years ago. Despite this long history, it's only in the last few centuries that we've decided that the North should consistently be at the top of the map. History buffs tell us that for a long time, the North was hardly ever at the top because it symbolized darkness. The West didn't make the cut either, given that's where the sun bows out each evening. However, early Asian maps seem to defy this trend. Now, before you say it, their compasses weren't the reason they put North at the top. Early Asian compasses were actually aligned to point south, seen as a more favorable direction than the cold, dark north. But in these maps, the emperor, who resided up north, was always placed at the top, with his loyal subjects gazing upwards towards him. Looking back, every culture had its own idea of what was worth looking up to, leading to varied orientations of early maps. The Egyptians preferred the east, where the sun graces us each morning. Early Arabic maps favored the south. European maps from the same era put the east at the top. So, when did everyone decide that north was the new top? You might be tempted to credit it to explorers like Columbus and Magellan who navigated by the North Star, but they didn't really see the world in that light. Columbus, for instance, saw the world with the east at the top, believing he was headed toward paradise. Mercator's 1569 world map was a game changer, considering it was the first to factor in the Earth's switch to more accurate navigation. But even then, the emphasis wasn't on the north. Mercator projected the poles to infinity, considering them relatively unimportant as sailors didn't venture there often. It's possible that the choice to place north on top was simply because the Europeans, who were doing their fair share of exploring, were located in the northern hemisphere with a whole lot more land to cover and people to meet. For whatever reason, this north-up idea has stuck. Even when a NASA astronaut in 1972 snapped a photo of the Earth with the south at the top, it was flipped over to avoid confusion. Here's where it gets interesting. When you gaze at Earth from space, the concept of up and down loses all sense. Sure, Earth aligns with the plane of other planets in our solar system because we all share a cosmic birth story, but we could just as well flip the image or put the sun on top or bottom depending on your cosmic viewpoint. Even within the Milky Way, our solar system is tilted by about 63 degrees. If you think about it, the concepts of up, down, left, or right don't really apply in space. But how about a change of pace? Should we be open to viewing our world from a different perspective? There's some psychological evidence that our north-up mentality might be skewing our perceptions of value. Most folks consider the north to be up and the south down. It even made psychologists wonder if these associations might influence how people value different places on a map. When shown a map of a made-up city, people were more likely to choose a residence in the northern part. And when asked where hypothetical people of different social status would live, they allocated the rich to the north and the less fortunate to the south. It's not too big of a leap to speculate that humans might be less bothered about what happens to regions lower than where they are on the map. But there's a simple solution: flip the map upside down. These experiments showed that this simple action wiped out the north equals good bias. On that note, south-up maps are already available online. Australians would enjoy this change, that's for sure. Whatever it is that you'd prefer at the top of your map, you would need a compass to guide you. Have you ever paused to think of its system? It is one of the oldest gadgets we've got in our survival toolkit. It's been around for centuries, serving as a beacon for adventurers, travelers, and explorers, guiding them through uncharted oceans and helping them discover new continents. Basically, compasses turned humans from stay-at-home types into globe-trotting nomads. Our beautiful blue planet isn't just a spinning ball in the cosmos. It also has its own magnetic field. Imagine it as a colossal magnet, humming with invisible energy. This is all thanks to Earth's core, a ball of molten iron under terrific pressure right at the center of our planet. This core, part liquid, part solid crystal, churns and swirls due to Earth's spin, creating the magnetic field that gives us our north and south poles. But here's where it gets a bit complicated. These magnetic poles don't perfectly line up with the Earth's geographic poles, the ones that the Earth spins around. They're close, sure, but not exactly in the same place. This is why the compass, which reacts to magnetic fields, doesn't point directly to what we call true north, which is the geographic North Pole. Instead, it points to the magnetic north, located a bit off from the true one. But don't worry, it's close enough to get us where we need to go. Let's talk more about this true north versus magnetic north business. Remember the piece of news from September 2019, when for the first time in over 360 years, compasses at Greenwich pointed to the true north? Well, that's quite a rare occurrence. Usually compasses point towards magnetic north, which isn't a constant spot on the map. It changes and drifts over time, following shifts in the Earth's core. On the other hand, true north refers to the geographic North Pole, a specific unchanging point on Earth's surface. So when you're holding a compass, it's really the magnetic north it's directing you toward, not the true north. Here's where things get even more fun. The angle between the direction of the true north and the magnetic north, as shown by the compass, is called declination. It's a fancy word for a simple concept. Now, because Earth's magnetic field isn't a simple, straightforward thing, it has its wobbles and dips. The declination isn't the same everywhere. It varies from place to place. Also, here's what it's made of. It has this tiny needle that's made from a metal that's been magnetized. Iron's a common one. They set this needle on a little pointy thing, or pivot, and let it float in some kind of liquid. Often, it's mineral oil or something similar. This lets the needle spin around and dance with the Earth's magnetic field. When you hold your compass flat in your hand, the needle settles down and points to magnetic north. Now, look at your compass and you'll notice these small markings. They're known as degrees, and here's the fun bit. The needle's red end always points north, and the white or black end always points south. That's your compass's north-south dance. Plus, there's often an arrow on the compass case, right at the top. That's your orientation arrow.
There's a tiny island surrounded by the stunning clear Red Sea and a bustling underwater world. Zabargad, also known as St. John's Island, has no trees and consists mostly of paradotite, which is rich in peridot. And before you Google it, paradotite is a gemstone that has the nickname the Evening Emerald because of its sparkling green hue. Some historians believe Cleopatra herself loved paradots, and that lady could afford any jewels in the world. Geologists believe peridot forms as a result of the spreading of the seafloor. When the Earth's crust decides to part ways, rocks from deep down get pushed up to the surface. That's exactly how our treasure island formed. The African and the Asiatic continental plates bumped into each other, and rocks in the lower crust went above sea level. Paradot also comes from meteorites that have crashed into Earth, but that's really rare. Its color ranges from a brown-green color to yellowish-green to pure green. Yellowish-green is the most common shade you'll see in jewelry. This color is possible thanks to a good amount of iron in the stone. The deposits of this beauty are spread all across the world, from Vietnam to Arizona and Hawaii, Tanzania, South Africa, Sri Lanka, and Norway. And then, of course, there's Zabargad. So, this place is geologically unique as it's an island built of uplifted mantle, and it's also the oldest and longest known source of paradots in the world. The first people came here for the gemstones many centuries ago. Famous Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder mentioned in his writings that pirates had discovered Zabargad's treasures in the year 500 before the current era. The beautiful green rocks made their way to Queen Bernice of the Roman Empire. They came from the ancient trading port Berenike on the edge of Egypt's eastern desert. When the city fell in the 6th century, all work stopped, and the island with all its treasures stood alone for hundreds of years. In the 19th century, British explorers found the beautiful green island in the Red Sea and figured out it was the one described by Pliny the Elder a long time ago. Turkey did some mining here in the 20th century. Over just 4 years, they managed to collect over $2 million in Paradots. They sent the gemstones to France for cutting. The work conditions on the island were nothing like a tropical fairy tale you could imagine. There was no drinking water for workers, so they had to install a gas-powered water condenser. Now, this territory belongs to the Elba National Park System. Most people come here to see the underwater beauties of the reefs, but if you look above the water, you can still see some beautiful sparkling paradots. If Christmas Island in Australia is on your travel list, plan the trip wisely. If you end up there in October or November when the wet season begins, you won't be able to enjoy a walk around. Red crabs cover the whole island like a blanket. And it's not one of those fluffy blankets you want to wrap yourself into. Over 100 million crabs are on a mission to reach the shore alive, marking a crucial phase in their life cycle. For the majority of the year, these red crabs reside in burrows and rock crevices. They have fruits, berries, fallen leaves, and various organic matter to keep them going. But when the dry season is over and the moon is in a specific phase, they know it's time to go. When they reach the coast of the Indian Ocean after several days of migration, they create deep burrows where females will eventually hatch their eggs. Once the burrows are ready, the male crabs return to the rainforests and the females stay at the beach for at least 12 days to keep the family going. The new parents are so smart, they follow the moon to pick the perfect moment with a milder tide to carry their eggs to the water. Once they hatch, the crabs bring their new family members back inland. There, they wait for the rainy season again to keep the circle of life going. To safeguard this magic, authorities close road in areas where crab migration takes place. Japan has a brand new addition to its archipelago. The world's newest landmass literally popped up in November 2023. This unnamed island is just over 300 feet in diameter. It's made of pumice and tuff left by an undersea volcano that kicked off its eruptions in October. The volcanic hustle has quieted down since then, and the waves are eroding chunks of the newly found land. Without lava flows to create a sturdy protective crust over the soft volcanic debris, the future of this freshly formed island is unstable. Similar islands had popped up before but were short-lived and vanished once volcanic activity ceased. An island born in 2021 the same way is still visible today though, so the newborn island might have some life prospects. If not, we're likely to see more territories like this. Japan is super rich in active volcanoes on land, with over 100 in its collection. If you make friends with the Uros people living in the Lake Titicaca area and ask them for their address to send a postcard, they will have a hard time answering. Their ancestors from more than 500 years ago came up with a brilliant invention to protect themselves from the Incas. They built islands from totora roots and reeds that could be moved away from danger deep into the lake. Totora plants help the local community a lot since it's water resistant and is used for all sorts of things, from building boats to roofs and mattresses. The eyelets are even edible, and the flowers of the plant they're made of are used for tea. So there are around 120 eyelets still preserved, and over 1,000 people can live on them. From 2 to 6 families share one eyelet home. Since there's no need to run away from the Incas anymore, they need to make sure the eyelets stay in one place. Every 15 to 20 days, the reeds forming the eyelets decay and need to be replaced. To prevent constant drifting, locals use eucalyptus rods as anchors, firmly securing the eyelets. Despite their small size, these eyelets have 2 spoken languages. The residents craft their fabric and create stunning outfits. Solar panels provide sufficient power for them to have light and even TVs. The main islet has a radio station, and the locals have embraced tourism. you can make a reservation online and experience the floating life yourself. Some islands pop out of nowhere, and others disappear without a trace. One of the most famous so-called phantom islands is High Brazil off the coast of Ireland. Before you ask, no, it doesn't have anything to do with Brazil. High is a variation of I, which means island, and Brazil comes from the root bres, meaning mighty, great, beautiful in Irish, and it gave the name to one of the local deities. This tiny mist-covered island was first mapped in 1325, but later attempts to pinpoint its exact location didn't come to one result. So, legend has it that the island appears only once in 7 years, and even those who claim to have seen it say they had just sailed right through it without bumping into any land. Captain John Nisbet shared the story of how he had not only spotted High Brazil, but got stranded on it with his crew. According to him, the island boasted a castle and was mostly uninhabited. There was even an encounter with an ancient grave gentleman who shared the island's ancient history over a lavish feast. In the late 15th century, a series of expeditions set sail from Bristol to find the famous island. All attempts failed, and High Brazil disappeared from the maps in 1865. We might never find out if it was there in the first place, but it's a beautiful story anyway. If you've ever driven over the Rocky Mountains, you've probably seen road signs for the Continental Divide, the backbone of North America. All watersheds to the west of it run into the Pacific Ocean, and everything on its eastern slope goes straight into the Atlantic. There's just one creek in Wyoming that couldn't choose one side and drains into both oceans at the same time. Two Ocean Creek begins its journey high up in the Teton Range. The snow-capped peaks provide the perfect backdrop as the creek starts its descent, winding its way through alpine meadows and dense forests. As the creek continues its course, it gets to the Two Ocean Pass. This is the geographical crossroads where the creek splits into two branches, the Atlantic Creek and Pacific Creek. The Pacific Creek goes westward and becomes part of the larger Snake River watershed, bringing its waters to the Snake River, which eventually merges with the Columbia River and, finally, reaches the Pacific Ocean. The Atlantic Creek heads eastward and flows into the Yellowstone, Missouri, and Mississippi rivers, and eventually empties into the Gulf of Mexico. If you connect the two creeks' watersheds on a map, you'll get a single blue line between Oregon and Louisiana. Explorers struggling to find the Northwest Passage between the two oceans never knew they could have used the creek. They would just have to use really tiny boats. Some scientists believe that cutthroat trout had better luck in that way. They managed to migrate from the Snake River to Yellowstone River, most likely using the Two Ocean Creek. Technically, fish can travel over 6,000 miles to cover the whole distance from sea to shining sea in fresh water. The creek could be just perfect for that journey. There are hiking trails in Grand Teton National Park that lead to Two Ocean Pass. If you feel adventurous enough, you can stand at the literal crossroads of the continent and see the beginning of two aquatic journeys. Lenar Lake in India popped up literally out of nowhere around 52,000 years ago. Newer data says it could be much older, probably over 500,000 years. At first, scientists were sure that the lake was in an ancient crater of a long-extinct volcano. But then, geologists made a detailed analysis of the soil and water and found out that Lenar Lake has a space origin. The minerals found in its soil are similar to those found in moon rocks brought to Earth during the Apollo program. The lake is an impact crater left by a huge meteorite, which was almost 6 times heavier than the Empire State Building. The impact was so strong that the volcanic rock melted and turned into glass. In 2020, the lake, which was already unusual enough, suddenly turned pink. It wasn't a part of an early Barbie movie marketing campaign. The detailed analysis showed that the water contained an increased level of unique microbes. They accumulate on the surface and emit some pink pigment. After a while, the microbes settled to the bottom and the lake became transparent again. Flamingos that got their food from the lake also got to taste some of the microbes and became an even brighter shade of pink than usual. One of the most famous sights of Yellowstone National Park is the Grand Prismatic Spring. It's one of the largest springs in the world, and it's inspired people who have seen it since at least the 19th century. Back then, a group of trappers mentioned an indigo blue lake boiling like a huge cauldron. Decades later, expeditions came to the spring to study it better and explain its unusual appearance. But because the spring at its widest point is longer than an American football field, they had to build a special vessel and travel far from the shore. The scientists traveling in the boat never wore life vests. They knew those would be useless if the boat tipped over. The water in the middle of the spring is of near boiling temperature, and those vibrant colors are the result of extreme organisms living in the hot water. The temperature changes as you travel away from the center. Different species that don't mind the heat have settled in different parts of the pool, giving it its famous diverse pigments. Back in the early 20th century, someone got the interesting idea to try to irrigate a part of Nevada's Black Rock Desert. They drilled a well and found lots of water, but it was near boiling temperature. The water was clearly not good for agriculture, so the human-made geyser was left abandoned. Over the decades, it slowly turned into an impressive cone of calcium carbonate deposits. Then, in 1964, a geothermal energy company drilled another well close to the first one. The water they had found was of the same temperature. This time, it wasn't hot enough for their needs to produce energy, so they decided to cap the well and leave. But water managed to get up and out, and it completely dried up the first geyser. The second one, which got the name Fly Geyser, is still flowing burning hot water rich in minerals. The cone is multicolored and looks like it's not from this planet, thanks to the algae living in it, which love the heat. Every summer, Caño Cristales in Colombia turns into a liquid rainbow, or the River of Five Colors. At this time, and until the end of fall, the conditions are just right for the riverbed to turn bright red, yellow, green, blue, and black. We owe this beauty to certain aquatic plants growing in the river, a special type of riverweed. During the wet season, the river moves fast and the sun cannot get to these plants. During the dry season, there isn't enough water to feed them, so the time in between the seasons has the perfect conditions for this colorful show. It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. At some point, the number of tourists who wanted to see it became so huge that scientists got concerned it could be bad for this hotspot of biodiversity. The area is home to rare species of animals, birds, and plants. Now, there are ecotourism trails and strict opening hours. In August 2014, a man in Tunisia was going back home from the north after doing his business. It was a hot summer evening and he was dreaming about water when suddenly, it popped up right in front of him. There was a whole lake in the middle of the desert, and the man was pretty sure it hadn't been there several days before. The new body of water got the nickname Mysterious Lake, and actually became a great mystery. Hundreds of people came here to swim in the clear, cool water. The lake became a popular place, but a few days later, the water turned dark green. The locals didn't care about this and continued to bathe in the lake. But when scientists and geologists arrived at the place, they announced that the water was dangerous to swim in. The lake was stagnating. It didn't refresh itself from underground streams, and the rains didn't feed it either. That's why the water became moldy and dirty. The lake contained algae and a lot of harmful bacteria dangerous to the human body. Scientists also found out that the land in this region had phosphate deposits. This substance can decay. But even that didn't stop people from bathing in the lake in the middle of the desert. How it got there remains a mystery. Some experts think that heavy rains have filled a hole in the ground with water. Another, more popular theory says that an earthquake had formed the lake. The seismic activity must have torn the Earth's crust above the water table, and then underground springs had filled the crevice. So, in theory, the lake could drain back out one day, just as suddenly as it had appeared.
Okay, here's a quick pop quiz on geography and touristy stuff. What's the biggest city in Italy? Did you say Rome? Then you got it right. Rome has a population of over 2 million people. And what would you say is the current population of Venice? Well, that's a tricky one to know by heart. But to answer correctly, in 2022, it was a little over 258,000 people. Now, what if I told you that for 80% of them, the Venice they live in isn't the tourist and historical one with all the canals. It's rather the other side of town. If you know someone who's traveled to Venice before, they may have sent you a postcard with an image of a gondola in a canal. I bet you never imagined that Venice could also just look like this, just a regular old Italian city. As tourists, we have a strong misconception about what Venice is. We think the real Venice is what we see in the movies. Well, I hate to be the one to pop your illusion, but there's more to Venice than straight canals and old bridges. Here are the boundaries of the real Venice. Probably the postcards you get only picture this bit of the city called Centro Storico, or Historical Center. But the city also includes the mainland, called Terra Firma, where most Venetians live today. The interesting thing to look at is how the number of people living in the historical center has decreased over the years. From then on, the number started to reduce more with each passing year. Today, only 50,000 people can afford to live there. To understand that, let's travel back in time for a moment. Before Venice became an important Italian city, it was nothing but a fisherman's village. It was only around the 5th century that people decided to take a chance and build on the marshy ground of the Venetian islands. If you've ever wondered how Venice holds up, let's just say it's due to strong blocks of wood driven deep into the ground. As it turns out, you need oxygen and water to ruin wood, and in marshy soils, there isn't much oxygen, so the buildings were safe. It was during the Middle Ages that Venice became one of the world's most important maritime empires. You might remember that's where Marco Polo, the famous merchant and explorer, came from. The city was extremely well located, right in the Adriatic Sea, and had access to huge commercial empires of the time, like the city of Constantinople. At that time, the most prestigious jobs you can get were like the ones Marco Polo had, anything related to long-distance trading. Since then, Venice consists of 118 islands, and some say there are around 400 bridges in the city. Quick question here, can you name at least 2 of the most famous Venetian islands? Let's start with Burano. The island of Burano is famous for its lace making and its super colorful landscape. FYI, Burano is also home to a less famous leaning tower than the one in Pisa. It's called the Tower of Burano. And then there's the island of Murano. They are famous for their products of fine glass. You can find anything from huge vases to water glasses, jewelry, and so on. They're quite exquisite, but also super expensive. But you know what they say, time changes everything. In the 20th century, Venice was no longer the trading hub it once was. Its economic power was failing seriously, so the city decided to invest in something else, its historical value. And the best way they found how to do that was through preservation. Let's face it, if you're a tourist who enjoys history, you would jump at the opportunity of visiting a UNESCO heritage site, wouldn't you? Initially, this was rather good for the city. But the thing is, as tourism in Venice skyrocketed, the old dynamics of the city started to change to keep up with the intense tourism. Truth is, in our day and age, lots of tourists rather buy small and cheap souvenirs than invest their money in expensive manufactured goods, such as the classic Murano glasses. The traditional Venetian stores that were open hundreds of years ago just didn't have the economic power to compete with new stores that opened to cater specifically for tourists. And then, what happened next is something we often call falling down the rabbit hole. Because, as it turned out, tourists attracted more tourists, and Venice lost control over it. The maximum sustainable number of tourists in Venice would be around 22,500 people per day. But in 2021, Venice saw up to 80,000 tourists per day in certain parts of the year. If you remember that there are only 50,000 people living in Venice's historical center nowadays, that almost means that tourists outnumber locals by 2 to 1. This is what gave Venice one of its current nicknames amongst the locals, which is a short-term city. I mean, if you live in a touristy city such as New York City or Paris, you'd be sure to avoid the parts of the city that are more touristy. But in Venice, that's difficult, since we're talking about several small islands. Whether you want it or not, the city is constantly packed. Locals started to complain that things such as getting a table at a restaurant or crossing an important square, such as Piazza San Marco, would take hours. Not to mention that instead of normal car traffic, well, in Venice, you can experience some gondola traffic. But that's not even the worst that's been happening. As the number of tourists per year started to rise exponentially, so did the infrastructure to accommodate all these people. When landlords understood that they could make more money off of tourists than they could with locals, overall prices started to soar. That's why, from the 1950s onward, fewer Venetians were able to continue living in the city's historical center. Landlords decided to more than double the prices of housing. So, a family that paid around 800 euros for their apartment now had to pay something around 1,500 euros to stay in the same place. And social services couldn't even do anything about it because there were so many similar cases happening all over the historical center. This may sound like something small, but when you stop to look at the big picture, it's changing the social fabric of the city. Yep, that's what usually happens in super touristy places. France is having to deal with a similar problem of over-tourism. France's Ministry of Tourism has concluded that tourists are spending less money, yet over-exploiting the classic tourist landmarks. Cities are made up of much more than just buildings and infrastructure. As urban sociologist Georg Simmel said, cities need to be heterogeneous, and by raising the prices of rent so much, the first ones to be kicked out of the city were the younger generations. After that, only well-established elderly people could afford to stay in the city center. Things started getting so out of hand in Venice's historical center that UNESCO itself threatened to put the city on its list of heritage sites in danger of severe damage. That's tough, huh? The city is still trying to find ways to mitigate the effects of tourism. The first thing they did was to ban those huge cruise ships from stopping in the city's historical area. Oh, and the city produced a tourism fee. Normally, anyone sleeping in the historical center already pays a fee. But nowadays, tourists have to register their entry and pay a daily fee for exploring the main island. The profits from this fee are directed toward making life in Venice's city center more affordable. Hopefully, these policies will allow Venetians to move back to Venice's city center. Ciao!
Listen to this. Neanderthal fiber technology. Nope, I'm not joking. The concept is real. In 2020, a team of scientists published a paper that redefined the way we saw our closest ancestors. A find in France changed archaeology forever, and it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But let me start from the beginning. Neanderthals. For a long time, they fit the image of the typical cavemen. If you are now thinking of someone like Fred Flintstone, you wouldn't be much wrong. What was the reason behind this stereotype? When did we start believing that Neanderthals were not the brightest tools in the shed of evolution? In comes William King, a 19th century British geologist. He was the man who named the Neanderthals. Based on the bones King found, the scientist declared the species not intelligent, and this image stuck with the Neanderthals for centuries to come. But a piece of string, just a quarter of an inch long, changed everything. A small, dry river valley, Abri du Maras, was the place of the great find. Archaeologists unearthed a cord fragment next to a stone tool. Such twisted fibers could have been used for everything from making clothes to fishing nets. In prehistory, this was some advanced tech, and the Neanderthals seem to have mastered it. Scientists already knew that these early humans made tar from birch bark, and that they produced shell beads. There's even evidence of Neanderthal art. They were definitely not primitive. The string section and similar finds are changing the way we perceive our ancestors. The world of archaeology is constantly changing. Take the pyramids in Egypt, for example. Turns out, they weren't really built by an army of people who the pharaoh made work until they passed out. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, was the man who started the confusion. He claimed, in 500 BCE, that 100,000 men took part in the construction of the Great Pyramid in Giza. He made no mention of who they were and why they were building the pyramids. That's how the myth started. Huge stone slabs pulled by humans, driven by a foreman with a whip. But Egyptologists would beg to differ. Those are the scientists who study ancient Egypt's culture. Fairly recently, they uncovered a workers' village that told a different tale. Yes, there was evidence of hard work on the workers' bones, but the construction industry is demanding even today. It took almost 6 years for 12,000 workers to complete the world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa. Back in Egypt, 3 times more workers finished the Great Pyramid in around 2 decades. An impressive feat of ancient engineering, wouldn't you agree? Superiors looked well after the Egyptians who built the pyramids. Their diet was rich in protein. They had medical care and they got paid properly. In fact, they lived better than the non-working population. And they lived with their families near the construction site. Archaeologists know all this because they unearthed bakeries and dormitories with bread jars and other goodies. Looks like the pharaohs were okay employers after all, and the job market wasn't that terrible. They also kept detailed papyrus records of the build and hieroglyphs. You and I wouldn't stand a chance of reading these letters that resemble images. Egyptologists had the same problem. For over a millennium, no one had used this type of font. And it's not like there was an English ancient Egyptian dictionary you could open and find meanings of words. But all this changed in 1822. A couple of decades before, the French found a broken slab of black granite. The stone contained one text in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Demotic. The last one was also the Egyptian language, but in a simplified script. Scientists dated it back to 196 BCE. The content is a religious proclamation. A French philologist and Orientalist, Jean-François Champollion, was the first one to crack the code. You see, people haven't forgotten ancient Greek letters. The Frenchman successfully matched the Greek letters with the ones in the Egyptian script. And voila, we were finally able to read hieroglyphs. The name of the piece of granite that made it all possible was the Rosetta Stone. The importance of its discovery went beyond archaeology. The word Rosetta Stone even entered the English dictionary. It represents a discovery that helps people understand an enigma that has been puzzling them for a long time. There are similar games. A symbol is attached to a particular message. Then you have to decode the message by replacing the symbol with a corresponding letter. In a nutshell, this is what scientists did with the Rosetta Stone more than 2 centuries ago. Do you know what is the oldest deciphered language in Europe? It has an unattractive name, Linear B. The script belongs to the Mycenaean Greek language. It predates the ancient Greek alphabet by several centuries. You can easily guess which script it is descended from. Linear A. The people from Crete used Linear B more than 1,000 years ago. During the Late Bronze Age, the Greek civilization that used the script vanished. There was no one who could read Linear B, and more importantly, no one knew it existed in the first place. This was about to change during the first years of the 20th century. A British archaeologist by the name of Sir Arthur Evans excavated a vast palace complex at Knossos, Crete, Greece. This was the center of the Minoan culture that created the enigmatic script. The palace boasted some 1,300 rooms. They had colorful paintings of dolphins, griffins, and bulls. All of these captivated the archaeologists' imagination. But their biggest find was at first overlooked: thousands of slabs of baked clay. The fire that brought down the palace helped preserve the tablets. It was impossible to read the slabs, though. They were written in an unknown language. The scientific community had to wait for another half a century before Michael Ventris cracked the code. He was an English architect and cryptographer. Ventris studied Greek and Latin. While attending the famous archaeologist's lecture, the young man decided to solve the puzzle of Linear B once and for all. He managed to do so in 1952. One of Ventris's most amazing discoveries was that the script was an archaic form of Greek. but cryptology still hasn't solved the code of Linear A. This writing system will remain a mystery until a motivated young person like Michael Ventris comes along. They wouldn't have to be a professional archaeologist. Basil Brown certainly wasn't. Yet in 1939 he discovered the richest early medieval tomb in Europe. This happened in Sutton Hoo in the southeast of England. This wasn't an ordinary tomb made out of stone. It was a full-size ship, 3 times as long as a London double-decker bus. And that's not all. Apart from its main purpose, the ship was full of riches. Deluxe hanging bowls, feasting vessels, gold and dress accessories, and luxurious textiles were just some of the treasures found. Archaeologists were also amazed by the silverware from distant Byzantium. You probably know this city as Istanbul, Turkey. Even in our age, it's several days' drive from Sutton Hoo. Just imagine how much time and money it cost to import a silver plate in the 7th century. That's when the ship went down, according to archaeologists. The English couldn't have done it. At that time, there was no England. The people living in the British Isles at the time were the Anglo-Saxons. Perhaps the ship from the grassy mounds in Suffolk belonged to one of their kings? We will never know. The local acidic soil did away with any possible evidence, or no one laid there in the first place. It could have been a cenotaph, which is a monument constructed to honor an important person. The archaeologists still don't have a definite answer. But what they have found at Sutton Hoo shed light on the Dark Ages. Before the discovery of the ship, they knew little about what had been going on in Britain after the Romans left. Now, the image of the early Anglo-Saxon society was much clearer. Perhaps the English soil will be the site of the next great breakthrough in archaeology. Have you ever wondered how cool buildings of the future are going to look? Well, hold on tight because artificial intelligence is here to revolutionize the world of architecture. AI is a great sidekick. It can give the architects incredible new tools to create mind-blowing structures that are not only stunning, but also eco-friendly and super efficient. So let's check what our beautiful future might look like. First of all, you know how cities can get crazy busy and overwhelming, right? Well, guess what? AI is here to save the day and make our cities super smart. Imagine you're cruising down the road in your flying car. Yes, we'll have those. Thanks to AI, the traffic flows like a dream. No more endless gridlock. The city knows where the most likely crime spots are and takes proactive steps to keep us safe. It's like having superheroes on every corner. And hey, forget about trash piling up. AI makes sure waste is managed efficiently, keeping our city clean and fresh. They can act as a city manager who can optimize everything from traffic to safety and even waste disposal. They can analyze tons of data from all sorts of places like sensors and social media. With all that information, they can help city planners make brilliant decisions that make our lives better. Okay, so you stroll down the street, and your eyes are instantly captivated by an extraordinary building. Its futuristic curves and features make it stand out from the rest. And it not only catches your eye, but also gives Mother Nature a high five. You might think it was designed by a genius architect, but little do you know it was actually a collaboration between humans and artificial intelligence. Imagine having a super smart design buddy who can whip up thousands of incredible building ideas in a blink of an eye. That's what AI-assisted design software does for architects. It can generate and assess a ton of design options. They take into account stuff like the best materials to use and the perfect placement for the building. Also, by analyzing data and crunching numbers, algorithms can help optimize the building's design. They can ensure it minimizes energy usage, conserves water, and manages waste like a pro. Every building strives to reduce costs, save energy, and promote a better world. The result? Architectural masterpieces that are both jaw-droppingly beautiful and super practical. The cityscape of the future will be dotted with these awe-inspiring structures. Oh, but that wasn't impressive enough for you? Well, how about a stunning, futuristic building that seems to defy gravity? It's not made of traditional bricks and mortar, oh no. This marvel was created using the powers of 3D printing. With the help of AI, architects designed every intricate detail and fed all the important data, like what materials to use and how the site conditions might affect the structure. AI algorithms worked their magic to optimize the design, making it both breathtakingly beautiful and rock solid. 3D printing is basically like having a magical machine that can create awesome structures straight out of a sci-fi movie. And AI jumps in to make sure these structures are not just pretty, but also strong. In the city of the future, 3D printing will become the ultimate architect's tool. It will allow them to create structures that were once impossible to build. From mind-bending shapes to intricate details, the possibilities are endless. But AI isn't just making buildings look great, it also makes them efficient and cozy. Let's say you step into a futuristic office building, and voila! The lights automatically adjust to match your mood, and the temperature is set perfectly for you. These futuristic buildings are capable of sensing and responding to their surroundings, just like you do. They control the lighting, keeping it just right for the time of day. They manage the temperature, so it's always cozy and comfortable. They even keep a watchful eye on security and fix small issues before they become big headaches. So, the smart building knows when people come and go, so it optimizes energy usage accordingly, saving the planet and some cash along the way. Now the cool thing is, all these aren't the only possibilities. How about turning skyscrapers into a vertical forest? Recently, an architect from India got super excited about the power of artificial intelligence. So, he decided to team up with an image bot called Midjourney to create a vision for the future. But instead of a dull, robotic world, they aimed for something spectacular. With text prompts like utopian technology and futuristic towers, the architect and AI got to work. Guess what? Midjourney didn't disappoint. It conjured up a world where buildings were covered in lush vertical forests and adorned with shapes inspired by nature. They wanted to create a sustainable future that harmonized with the environment. The architect, Manas Bhatia, is super positive about AI's potential. He doesn't see it as a threat to his job, but as a powerful tool for positive change. He envisions a future where architects and AI collaborate to make breathtaking designs. In his project, Bhatia even asked the AI to imagine symbiotic and hollowed structures, and it responded with pictures of apartments nestled within hollowed-out trees. Imagine a world where the building itself becomes a living, breathing part of nature. Well, Bhatia believes that nature should play a big role in architecture. He loves designing structures that embrace nature's beauty and functionality. From buildings built around trees to facades that regulate temperature, he's all about blending architecture with the natural world. With architects like Bhatia and the superpowers of AI, the future of cities is going to be amazing. So get ready to step into a world where nature and technology coexist in perfect harmony. It's a dream we can't wait to see come true. Or if you're not a big fan of trees, how about this? Skyscrapers that aren't made of solid bricks, but instead, they're inflatable wonders. Zumo, an architectural practice in Barcelona, used the magic of AI to bring these wobbly structures to life. These inflatable superstructures rise above future cities like illuminated balloons in the sky. Here's the best part. These inflatable buildings have sustainability superpowers. You can pump them up to towering heights, flatten them for easy transportation, and rebuild them wherever they're needed. Plus, they're powered by renewable energy, reducing their impact on the environment. Pretty cool, right? Phew. The future is zooming toward us like a rocket. Artificial intelligence can become the secret sauce that makes architects' work extra special. But hey, with great power comes great responsibility. We need to use AI wisely and ethically. For now, we don't have to worry about machines replacing architects. Artificial intelligence still needs a human hand, or else we might end up with buildings that look like mashed up bananas or ice cream cones, unless that's your thing. In addition, humans have one important advantage. They, well, are humans. We need to keep in mind that artificial intelligence doesn't have emotional intelligence. It's a brainy genius, but it can't fully understand the feelings and vibes we humans crave in our spaces. So, we must remember to infuse our designs with that human touch, those warm and fuzzy elements that make us go, "Ah, I feel right at home." And let's not forget that AI is still learning. It's basically just taking its first steps, and we need to be patient and give it time to grow. Rushing things too quickly could lead to wonky designs or buildings that look like a jumbled puzzle. This might look cool if you like avant-garde architecture, but for regular folk, no thanks. So, as the future unfolds at warp speed, let's embrace the wonders of AI in architecture. But let's also remember to balance its brilliance with our own human touch. Together, we can create a future where buildings are not just functional, but also filled with heart and soul. It's an adventure that's out of this world.
According to the United Nations, India became the most populous country in the world in 2023. Can you guess where the United States of America stands in that rating? It's number 3. And America is the 4th largest country in terms of size. It takes up some 6% of Earth's landmass. Plenty of space for 335 million people who live there, right? No need to squeeze them into one region. Well, not quite. The population of the U.S. is distributed pretty unevenly. Let's draw a line right through the middle of the country. It'll run from North Dakota in the north to Texas in the south. Once you input census data and do some math, astounding figures appear. 80% of the U.S. population lives east of the imaginary line. The remaining 20% live to the west. That's just 1 in 5 Americans. We're talking about large metropolitan areas, such as Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. You don't believe me? Just look at a satellite map of the U.S. at night. The right part is shining pretty bright, right? But why? Why is there such a huge imbalance in population? Simply put, history and geography. The East Coast is the place where the U.S. became independent in 1776. These are the original 13 colonies. Soon enough, settlers started spreading westward. One important milestone was the Louisiana Purchase. Today, this region is mostly what we call the Midwest. The area aligns nicely with the Mississippi watershed. Yup, this means plenty of fertile soil ideal for agriculture. But does this automatically mean a spike in population? The demographics of the U.S. reveal that a majority of its citizens live either on the east or the west coast. This leaves a large patch of land in the middle of the country virtually empty. People know it as America's underpopulated belt. The area stretches from the Canadian border in the north to Mexico in the south. The total surface area of this strip of land is 350,000 square miles. That's twice the size of California. One massive piece of land. In fact, this narrow strip accounts for 12% of the contiguous United States. That's the U.S. without Alaska and Hawaii. The belt runs north to south through 7 states, but its population makes up only 1% of the total number of people living in the United States. Now, this doesn't mean that the area is completely empty. It's still home to just over 3 million people. That's roughly the population of the island country of Jamaica. But there is room here for many more residents. Let's take the example of Nigeria. Its total land area is slightly bigger than the sparsely inhabited belt in America. But Nigeria's population is a huge 206 million people. This makes it the 7th most populated country on the planet. Impressive, right? But why isn't the American Midwest living up to its potential? Well, time for one last history lesson. I've already mentioned how the United States expanded from the East Coast to the West Coast. This doesn't mean that the West was lagging too far behind. Take, for example, the cities of San Francisco and Los Angeles. They were incorporated in 1850. That's just 13 years after Chicago. The following year, Portland, Oregon became incorporated. You get the picture. And then, in 1869, the United States completed building its first transcontinental railroad. In terms of transport, the country was unified. There is no historical reason strong enough to explain why so few people live in the center of the country. So now it's time for some interesting geography. If you look at the physical map of the United States, you'll notice that this belt lies in the Great Plains. As the name suggests, the area is flat, which should be ideal for large settlements. Well, not really. East of this region, there is a huge patch of the color brown. It's covered by mountains. But not just any mountains. These are the Rockies. The range is around 76 million years old. It has several peaks over 14,000 feet. And most of the Rockies are national parks, a vast nature reserve. But most importantly, the range plays a vital role in the region's climate. Ever heard of the rain shadow effect? Let me explain. Wet weather systems form over the Pacific Ocean. Then they travel east, where they meet the Rockies. Now the air has to go up over the mountains. This is where it cools down and condenses. The final result? A lot of rain and snow for the people living on or west of the range, and just a few drops east of it. When air from the Pacific finally reaches the Great Plains, it doesn't contain much moisture anymore. In fact, the weather system starts taking up moisture from the surrounding landscape. This creates an arid climate east of the Rocky Mountains. That's the exact location of the belt where so few Americans live. It's one of the driest parts of the country. So when settlers came in the 19th century, they were like, nah, I'll just continue west. Plus, there was the gold rush in California they were heading for. The climate in this part of the plains isn't great for agriculture, and huge fluctuations in air temperature don't help either. In a single day, temperatures can drop from 70 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit. These sudden changes in outside temperature are harmful to human health. It's like stepping inside an air-conditioned room on a sizzling summer day. Not a pleasant feeling. Southern California has a similarly dry climate, yet close to 40 million people live there. This makes California the most populous U.S. state. Their secret? A vast network of irrigation canals and aqueducts, plus a share of water from the Colorado River. Summers in the Great Plains get very hot, while winters are extremely cold. The reason behind these wild weather patterns are polar winds. They get a piggyback ride along the ridges of the Rockies and then rapidly descend into the plains. A winter day in Wyoming, for example, can start pleasantly warm, but later in the afternoon, the temperature can easily drop below zero. You just wouldn't know how to dress, and you probably wouldn't want to relocate here. That's what 99% of Americans think too. Humans like to feel comfortable, so we choose to live in temperate climate zones. Places that are either too cold or too hot don't have a large population. Just look at the driest inhabited continent. You've guessed it correctly, it's Australia. Nearly 70% of the country is either arid or semi-arid. That's a subtle way of saying that it's a desert. That's why Australians are huddled in coastal areas. 90% of them live in big cities, such as Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth. The only exception is the capital, Canberra. They build it inland close to a water source. But Australia's interior is sparsely populated. Just like in the States, there is only one major town in an area the size of 12 Lake Michigans. A huge shout-out to the residents of Alice Springs. They truly live in an oasis. And what about places with a temperate climate, like Europe? The population is evenly distributed here, right? Well, yes and no, depending on the country. In Germany, 77% of people live in urban areas. They have plenty of major cities to choose from. Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Köln all have over 1 million residents. But let's look at neighboring France. How many cities with a population over 1 million can you name? Okay, Paris, definitely. It has over 12 million residents in the metropolitan area. But now comes the staggering fact. The next two cities on the list have a population of barely 2 million, respectively. Can you notice the huge imbalance? This is the case in most large European countries. In Greece, for example, 35% of the population lives in the capital, Athens. So, the largely underpopulated center of the United States is not a unique example. America is the land of opportunities, but chances of finding a better life are greater in large cities. The country's top 100 metropolitan areas account for at least 3/4 of the nation's GDP, and most of them are located on the east and the west coast. There are no cities with over 1 million residents in America's underpopulated belt. You know, a lot happened in the first millennium CE. Sure, we're talking about 1,000 years worth of human history. If you'll remember from school, you'll know it was the time of the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. It was when humans saw the transition to the intense times of the Middle Ages. And some say it was the apex period of the Mayan civilization, all the way in Mesoamerica. But thanks to top-notch technological advancements, we can look at history a lot differently today. You see, archaeologists have found actual proof that the Mayan civilization may have started way before we think it did, and that since the beginning, their civilization was far from simple. To find out more about this, you'll have to tread deep into the Guatemalan rainforests. Are you down for the ride? Rainforests are dense and difficult to access. If you were an archaeologist, I'm betting you'd find them quite threatening as well. That's actually one of the reasons why we've been kept in the dark for so long when it comes to the truth about the Mayans. But take a look at this. You'd expect to see ruins like this in places like Portugal, England, or the United States. I'm talking about 130-foot wide roads, painted white to help travelers journey through the nighttime. For scale, these roads were about half the size of an American football field. Huge, huh? Scientists recently unearthed a 110-mile network of roads such as these, and they think this dates back to before the first registered Mayan ruins we've known so far. These roadways, which sometimes ran over swampy ground and were even elevated at times, are being called the world's first superhighways. Even if there is no registry of animal-powered vehicles, it's believed that the Maya used them to travel around a network of possibly 964 settlements. They were built like a huge spider web, and from what archaeologists have gathered, they worked as an implied system of economic and social interactions. This completely debunks the traditional idea that the Mayan pre-classic period, which dates back to 1000 to 350 BCE, was made of small tribal settlements. Imagine the manpower and engineering ability you need to muster to build something close to these white highways. Scientists believe that these causeways were built pretty much the same way as the Mayans built their pyramids. Oh, and if you're wondering about these gigantic pieces of architecture, don't worry, we'll talk about them in a bit. Now, so far, scientists believe that the roads were built with a mixture of mud and quarry stone. Oh, and using several layers of limestone, of course. Researchers were only able to find all of this out because of a new technology called LiDAR imaging. Do you know how we've used sonar technology to map out the ocean bed? Well, this is very similar to that. But instead of using sounds, we use laser systems. This mapping system allows researchers to see through and beyond the thick canopies of forest. The first they saw was a room with a hidden door. Once they opened the door, they discovered an 8-foot-long corridor. At the end of this corridor was the queen's chamber, and inside was the mummy of the queen herself. They found her to be accompanied by her pearls, jade shells, and expensive rocks. But as the team explored the remains, they saw something strange. The room was filled with a red-colored powder. Researchers knew that the color red was important to the Mayan people, but they didn't understand why the queen was buried with this unknown substance. They took a sample back with them for further analysis and discovered that the red powder was cinnabar, a very dangerous mineral. This powder, when inhaled, can cause severe health damage to a person. The team concluded that this could only be a trap for anyone trying to steal her riches. Talk about curses, huh? One thing that has always troubled researchers is the lack of evidence on the decline of this almighty empire. What could have been the cause of their demise? Was it a drought? Some disease? New research in 2017 did shed some light on this issue. Using data from a site called Ciabal, located southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the unexpected passing of this great civilization. The information shows that instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely fell in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. So, what's your take on the end of this story?
Can you tell me what date it is today? Piece of cake. You just look at your smartphone and voila, you immediately know the day, month, and year. But was it always this easy to tell the date? Did the ancient people even have the concept of a year that lasts 365 days? Yes and no. Mayan calendars had cycles. That's close to what we call a year. But the Mayan cycle was much longer, 819 days. And this is where the mystery begins. 819 days compared to what? When does this calendar begin, and when does it end? Scientists were asking themselves this question for decades. They discovered and deciphered the Mayan calendar during the 1940s. Recently, 2 American scientists, John Linden and Victoria Bricker, came forward with a solution. So, what did they do differently from their predecessors? The duo deciphered the code by broadening their thinking. They expanded the calendar from 819 days to full 45 years. That's 20 times longer than the original cycle. And a pattern started to emerge. This was a major breakthrough because the Maya told time in a complicated way. You can forget about the easy-to-read Arabic numerals we have today. These ancient people used glyphs. These are tiny images that represent characters. Something like the icons on your desktop or universal symbols. When you see a little dot with 3 curved lines above it, you know there is a Wi-Fi network available. The Mayan calendar used glyphs that represented animals or natural phenomena. For example, there were symbols for a jaguar and an eagle. Each glyph marked one day. Each cycle is repeated 4 times, 8 and 19 x 4. Let's call these 4 cycles blocks. The Mayas colored each block differently. Scientists thought these colors corresponded to the 4 cardinal directions. Red was east, white, north. West was black, and finally, yellow marked south. But then the 1980s came. Yeah, this was a weird decade. The calculations were all wrong. Researchers determined that the colors were associated with the position of the sun in the sky. It turned out that the color yellow represented the highest point of the sun, which is called a zenith. White was the lowest point, called the nadir. It seems that the calendar showed just how good the ancient Mayas were at astronomy. This is most evident at Chichen Itza. This principal Mayan city is located on the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. There stands an impressive step pyramid. It is dedicated to the feathered serpent deity, and its alignment is perfect. Something marvelous happens here twice a year, during the equinoxes, March and September. These are the times when the sun shines directly over the equator. On these 2 dates, the day and night last the same. At the site of the pyramid, sunlight first illuminates the sculpture of the serpent head at the base of the structure. Then it makes its way up the 91 steps. This creates the illusion that a snake is slithering down the pyramid. Even today, people gather to witness the sight. And it must have been more impressive when the Mayas completed the structure 1050-1300 CE. Do you know what a synodic period is? Neither do I. But Mayan astronomers did. A synodic period is the time that passes before a stellar body does a full lap. For example, this is the period between two full moons. When you look from Earth, this period lasts roughly 30 days. And the Mayas were looking at the skies non-stop. They carefully noted the synodic periods of all planets. From Venus to Saturn, these ancient astronomers kept records of nearly all celestial bodies. But what does this have to do with their calendar? The American researchers' calculations revealed the link. Let's take the planet closest to the Sun as an example, Mercury. Its synodic period is 117 days. Multiply that by 7 and you get which number? Exactly 8 to 19, when 17 x 7 equals sign 819. Coincidence? Definitely not. Because synodic periods of other planets also neatly match the magical figure 819. But this is not visible from a single Mayan cycle. Scientists had to expand it several times to discover the pattern. There is a reason why no one could decipher the code for so long. They were focused on a single planet. The trick was to add the Mayan calculation for all the planets. Researchers just needed to see the bigger picture. This brings us to the year 2012. Can you remember that some people thought that the world would end on December 21st? That turned out to be a bust. We are alive and well now. But what started this false rumor? The Mayan calendar, of course. You see, these ancient people based their calendar on long periods of all the planets. That included a lot of complicated math and a lot of multiplying. This 2012 was simply the time when their cycle ended. It is known as the long count. This period is the same as our year. For the Mayas, 2012 was something like the 31st of December for us. Just an end of a cycle in which they measured time, so there was no need to panic. Those New Year's Eve parties might be a bit wild, but the world doesn't end on January 1st. The Mayas stretched more than their calendar. Rubber was the name of the game. Yes, you've heard it correctly. These ancient people were making different grades of rubber 3,000 years before one famous American did, Charles Goodyear. They would extract natural latex from the rubber tree. This is a milky substance that can be turned into rubber. And they weren't the only ones. Scientists found evidence that their neighbors, the Aztecs and the Olmecs, did the same. But what did they do with rubber? They didn't need car tires, definitely. But it's cool to have a nice pair of sandals for the beach. The Spanish wrote about rubber sole footwear that natives wore. Sadly, scientists still haven't found them. That would be a big step for archaeology. So the Maya were playful with rubber, literally. Researchers guessed that they produced balls from latex. These were bouncy and ranged in size from a softball to a soccer ball. A typical Mayan ball game, pits, involved 2 hoops. You must be thinking basketball, but not quite. The hoops were set on walls, 23 feet high. Compare that to the NBA standard of 10 feet. And the hoop was the other way around. There is also a sweet side to the story of the Mayas. These ancient people enjoyed chocolate. In fact, the modern word chocolate probably comes from their language, Xocolotl. This meant bitter water. Okay, you get the bitter part, but why water? The Mayas didn't produce chocolate in the form we know it today. They didn't make bars of chocolate. They drank it. Smashed cocoa beans made for excellent drinks. The Mayas perfected the mixture over time and even added spices. Anyone up for a fiery chocolate drink with stew peppers and cornmeal? Who knows, maybe this beverage actually tasted well. Cocoa beans were sacred and used as a currency. Researchers believe all social classes got to enjoy it. Free chocolate for all sounds nice even today. But where did the Mayas get clean water for their cocoa drinks? From the oldest known filtration system in the Western Hemisphere. It was based on zeolite. These are minerals that contain aluminum and silicone compounds. And guess what? Modern air and water purifiers still use this material. Mayan tech wins yet again. Back in Europe, Roger Bacon developed a sand filtration system in 1627, some 1,800 years after the Mayas. But what about regions without rivers, lakes, or springs? Mayan engineers had it all figured out. Rainwater. They would carve out large reservoirs in the limestone bedrock. Then, they would coat these underground caves with a layer of a watertight material. The final step was to make small channels that collected water from the hills above. Scientists estimated that just one of these reservoirs could hold on average 10,000 gallons of rainwater, enough to fill 55 modern hot tubs.
Imagine a world where instead of water, the oceans are made of methane. Yeah, that's right. Instead of swimming in H2O, you'd be paddling around in CH4. It's like Mother Nature's version of a fizzy drink. Such oceans actually exist on one of Saturn's moons called Titan. In fact, the methane and ethane on Titan play a similar role to the water on Earth. They cycle through the atmosphere and form clouds that eventually rain down onto the surface. They were discovered by the Cassini-Huygens space probe, and apparently, our entire planet's oil reserves could fit in one of Titan's puddles. Even the desert sand dunes on Titan have more organics than all of Earth's coal reserves. Who knew that Titan was the place to go if you're ever in need of fuel for your car? Now, obviously, there are some things that distinguish methane lakes from our water ones. First, the temperature on Titan is around negative 290 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like taking a dip in a giant glass of liquid nitrogen. Not exactly ideal for a beach day, is it? Methane is also less dense than water, so if you were to go swimming in such an ocean, you'd float like a balloon. On the bright side, it would make doing the backstroke a lot easier. Next, while water waves can be pretty majestic, unfortunately, we can't ride any on Titan. Cassini didn't detect any big waves there. Maybe it's due to low seasonal winds, or the fact that some of the lakes are much smaller than Earth's lakes, but we don't know for sure. Also, I know what you're thinking. If the oceans are made of methane, could you set them on fire? Technically, yes. Methane is a highly flammable gas, so if you were to light a match in a methane ocean, you'd get a pretty impressive but dangerous blaze. So, given all these differences, the question arises, what would a planet with such oceans look like? Well, we can make some guesses by looking at Titan. First of all, its atmosphere, composed primarily of methane, would be incredibly thick. Titan's atmosphere reaches nearly 370 miles into space, and the atmospheric pressure there is 60% greater than Earth's. So, if you ever wanted to experience the feeling of swimming super deep in the ocean, now's your chance. Also, methane is a powerful greenhouse gas that traps the sun's heat really well. That's why our planet would warm up faster than a sauna. You may ask, why is it so cold on Titan then? This is because this moon is very far from the sun, and light doesn't reach it well. But if we place our planet somewhere in the middle, then the temperature may even be quite comfortable. Actually, methane oceans on a planet could really spice up the climate. The planet would be a breeding ground for methane clouds. Just like on Titan, it could form an orange-colored haze, or smog, that would make our planet look like a real mystery. It would be difficult to see us from space without some special telescopes. And let's not forget about methane storms. They would also occasionally drench the surface, so remember to bring your umbrella. But hey, at least the heavy carbon-rich compounds would make for some pretty sweet dune fields. And finally, the most important difference. While water oceans on Earth are teeming with all sorts of creatures, we're not sure if there's any life in methane oceans on Titan. If there is, they'd have to be pretty tough to survive in such extreme conditions. So, if life on such a planet exists, it would be very different from what we're used to seeing on Earth. For example, microbes might be able to handle it. These tiny resilient creatures can survive in a wide range of environments, including extreme ones. So it's possible that microbial life could exist in methane oceans. And what about us and animals? Well, scientist Robert Zubrin thinks that Titan might be the perfect place for humans to colonize in our solar system. According to him, this little moon has everything we need to survive and thrive. And if it's possible on that moon, then it could work with a planet too. For starters, we'd need some oxygen to breathe. We could use nitrogen and methane in the atmosphere to create breathable air and rocket fuel. We could also use these elements to make some fertilizers and grow plants. Next up, we'd need water. Since the oceans are made of methane, we can't exactly drink them. We'd need to find or create sources of water. Scientists believe that it actually may be hidden below the surface on Titan, together with some ammonia. We could use it to drink, or create even more oxygen. So, with all of these resources, we could create a self-sustaining colony even in a place with methane oceans. Piece of cake! Although, there are always alternatives. Maybe we could become methane breathers, evolve into organisms that use methane instead of oxygen. For example, we could get some large lungs because we'd have to inhale a much larger volume of air, since methane is less dense than oxygen. But this is pure sci-fi. Methane oceans are not the only unusual oceans in space. It turns out that seas on diamond planets may be even weirder. Take WASP 12b, for example. This exoplanet, located about 1,200 light-years away, might have oceans of tar. That's right, tar. The planet has more carbon than oxygen, which means its crust is probably made of things like diamond and graphite, instead of your average silica-based minerals like granite. Imagine stepping on this planet, and the first thing you notice is that the beaches are made up of black goo. It's like stepping into a nightmare, where you're trapped in quicksand made of sticky sludge. So forget about the sandy beaches and crystal clear water you're used to. Here, you'll be living the pitch life. Your swimwear will be replaced with hazmat suits, and you'll need a sturdy pair of boots to walk on the sticky surface. But in reality, WASP 12b is not the place to look for geology of any kind. It's simply too hot for anything to survive, let alone thrive. But there might be smaller, similar exoplanets where we could potentially live. Now, you might be thinking, tar oceans? That's crazy talk. But did you know that there's a 246-foot deep lake of natural asphalt here on Earth? It's called Pitch Lake, and it's located in Trinidad. It's formed when oil is forced to the surface, and the lighter components evaporate, leaving the thicker, heavier pitch behind. And guess what? This lake is home to a thriving ecosystem of microbes. So if you want to live on such a planet, at least you won't be alone. You'll have plenty of company in bacteria, fungi that love to feast on carbon found in asphalt, and archaea that live on methane. And finally, there are oceans of molten rock. That's right. Imagine a world where the floor is lava isn't just a game, but a reality. Welcome to 55 Cancri E, a planet so hot that the entire hemisphere facing its star is covered in magma. It's like a scene out of a heavy metal album cover. But don't worry, the other side of the planet is slightly cooler, so you can at least step off the lava and catch your breath. If you're feeling adventurous, you could always hop over to Koro T7b, another super Earth where the lava ocean is just as scorching. But this time, the night side doesn't offer much respite either. It's still seeing constant volcanic eruptions, like some sort of fireworks show. Scientists are scratching their heads trying to explain why these planets are so hot, and why they haven't cooled down yet. Maybe they're just really good at retaining heat, or maybe they just have a bad temperament. Either way, it's probably best to stick to playing the floor is lava on solid ground, and leave the real lava planets to someone else. All this diversity of oceans shows us that the universe is always full of surprises. It never ceases to amaze us with its creativity. Although these oceans are not suitable for human exploration yet, they challenge our understanding of what could exist beyond our world. So, let's continue to explore. We've all dreamed of visiting the Arctic and witnessing the natural wonders of polar bears frolicking on ice floes, or the aurora borealis dancing across the sky. Well, sorry to break it to you, but you won't find any tourists flocking to Antarctica anytime soon. Why, you may ask? Let's dive into it. First off, where is Antarctica? It's located in the southern hemisphere, specifically at the South Pole. The Southern Ocean surrounds it, and most of the continent is covered by ice, making it one of the most remote and frigid places on Earth. Now, have you ever met someone who's visited Antarctica? Probably not. It's one of the least visited places on the planet, and only a handful of lucky explorers have seen its interior, which is mostly made up of glaciers and ice fields. But trust me when I say the wildlife and scenery are out of this world. Why shouldn't you travel to Antarctica? Well, for starters, the environment is incredibly fragile and can be easily damaged. Plus, there are no native human populations on the continent, so your travels would essentially be like visiting an uninhabited island. And let's not forget that it's also one of the most expensive destinations to travel to. Despite all that, Antarctica is not exactly guarded like a fortress, but there is an international agreement called the Antarctic Treaty. This treaty was negotiated to prevent any unwanted activity on the continent and bans some forms of testing done there by member states. But the primary reason we can't just waltz into Antarctica is that it has a delicate ecosystem that needs protection. The treaty states that Antarctica should be used for peaceful purposes only and should be free from any human activity that could harm the environment. Scientists are still learning about the continent's unique ecosystem, and our activity and machines could disrupt the delicate balance that exists there. If you're still itching to go to Antarctica, getting permission isn't exactly a walk in the park. U.S. citizens, for example, need to complete a special form and send it to the Office of Ocean and Polar Affairs. And once you're there, you'll need to follow some strict guidelines to protect the environment, like not disturbing any wildlife or taking souvenirs like rocks, plants, or animals. Now, technically, can you live in Antarctica? While there are no laws banning people from living there permanently, it's a very inhospitable environment and unsuitable for human habitation. Temperatures can reach -76 degrees Fahrenheit and below, making it nearly impossible for anyone to survive without the proper equipment and experience. Plus, the nearest piece of land is over 1,000 miles away, making any inhabitants completely cut off from the rest of the world. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll get the chance to visit this unique and fascinating continent. But until then, let's admire it from afar. Let's now talk a bit about the discovery of Antarctica. Unlike other places that were already inhabited, Antarctica never had a native human population. Ancient Greek philosophers had an idea about the continent and called it Antarktos, meaning opposite the bear. The bears it refers to are not the polar ones though, but rather the Great and Little Bear constellations, which are only observable in the northern hemisphere. As a result, the term signifies the opposite of the land of the bear. Whaling and sealing voyages in the late 1700s and early 1800s would venture further south when rounding Cape Horn at the tip of South America. It was known that going further south often meant stronger winds, but also the risk of hitting floating ice of all sizes and of winds and seas that could prove dangerous to the ship and crew. Captain James Cook was the first to cross the Antarctic Circle on January 17, 1773, in the Ross Sea region. He reached a point further north a year later, and though he didn't sight land, he came to within 50 miles and saw deposits of rock held in icebergs, indicating that a more southerly land existed. The first sighting of Antarctica is widely acknowledged to have taken place in January of 1820, during the voyage of two ships under the command of Captain Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen, as part of a 2-year exploratory expedition around the world to discover new lands. The captain's ships were the first to have crossed the Antarctic Circle since Cook. The first undisputed landing on Antarctica didn't happen until much later, on January 24, 1895, at Cape Adare during the whaling voyage of the ship Antarctic, led by Henrik Bull. A small boat with 6 or possibly 7 men on board rowed ashore during calm conditions. You might not believe it, but Antarctica is actually a desert. With all that ice, you'd think it'd be like a winter wonderland with snowball fights and hot cocoa all day long. When we think of deserts, we picture camels and cacti and people struggling to find water. But in Antarctica, it's a whole different story. The struggle isn't to find water, it's to find anything that's not covered in ice. And the average rainfall has been just over 0.4 inches in the past 30 years. That's like a few drops of rain compared to what we're used to. So technically, it's not the dunes or sizzling heat that makes a desert, well, a desert. It's the lack of precipitation. But don't worry, if you ever find yourself lost in Antarctica, you won't have to worry about getting thirsty. Just make sure you bring a jacket and some mittens, because it's cold enough to make you into a popsicle. Not only is Antarctica one of the driest places on Earth, but it's also the coldest, the windiest, and the highest. Talk about overachieving. The penguins and scientists down in Antarctica have at times found themselves in a bit of a pickle when it comes to time. You see, unlike the rest of us on this big blue planet, there is no Antarctica time zone. All the lines of longitude meet at a single point at the South Pole, making it a bit of a head-scratcher when trying to figure out what time it is. Now, you might be thinking, but how do the scientists and researchers keep track of time down there? Good question. They typically stick to the time zone of the country they departed from. However, with stations from all over the world on the Antarctic Peninsula, things can get a little wacky. Imagine trying to coordinate with your neighboring countries without accidentally waking them up in the middle of the night. You might think that not much could survive in a place where the temperature is extremely cold, the sun barely shows up, and the wind could blow you away faster than a tumbleweed. Well, as in many places on Earth, life found a way in Antarctica too. Believe it or not, this frozen continent is buzzing with activity. It's home to billions of krill, which in turn attract lots of seals and more penguins than you can shake a fish at. But don't let their cute and cuddly appearance fool you. Penguins are the ultimate swimmers, with streamlined bodies that would make Olympic medal winners jealous. They come ashore to breed and chill, but their real talent is stealing pebbles from each other and forming mathematically precise huddles to stay warm. Antarctica is also home to the largest species of penguin on Earth. It's called the emperor penguin. Sure, these creatures are flightless birds, but that doesn't mean they can't jump. In fact, some of them can leap up to 120 inches. And let's not forget about the seals. With their furry bodies and special songs, these marine mammals are protected by the Antarctic Treaty, and they're thriving in the cool waters of the Southern Ocean too. But the real stars of the show are the whales. During the Antarctic summer, these huge creatures show up in droves to chow down on the abundant krill. It's indeed like a whale buffet down there.
Hey, I have an invitation for you. Pack your bags and let's head down to the world's most visited city, Paris. The city of love, the city of blinding lights, or whatever you want to call it. Our goal is to uncover as many secrets as possible regarding the world-famous Musée du Louvre. Are you up for it? Grab your travel book and bon voyage. The Louvre makes a big impression if you're visiting it for the first time. The traditional French Renaissance architecture is mixed with some modern elements, like the Louvre Pyramid. And that's our first stop today. To get inside the museum, you can go through the huge glass pyramid sitting right there in the Louvre's courtyard. If you're wondering what's the deal with this pyramid, let's stop here for a few minutes and learn some more about it. The Louvre Pyramid hasn't been here since the beginning. After all, the Louvre's main building, aka the Louvre Palace, dates back to 1190. But before it looked like what you see today, this place was a castle, full of moats and dungeons. And not dragons, because those aren't real, unfortunately. Anyways, the palace was commissioned by French King Philip II. Oh, and you can check out some of the medieval Louvre in the museum's basement. The Louvre only became a museum quite recently, historically speaking. In 1793, after the French Revolution, the nation decided that this building would be used to display France's prized collection of art. It wasn't until the 1980s that the idea of the glass pyramid came along. Then President François Mitterrand issued a big renovation of the Louvre. The project was called Grand Louvre, and it included the construction of a new entrance for visitors. By the 80s, the museum had already been receiving millions of visitors per year, and the entrance would often get crowded. And that's when foreign architect Io Ming Pei comes along. Mitterrand hired Pei to build an entrance that would connect the museum's 3 pavilions, and if you ask me, I'd say he did a pretty good job. We're talking about 200 tons of glass and iron. Not to mention that this glass, the so-called diamond glass, was specially designed to be completely transparent, without any green or blue tint to it. Pei wanted visitors to have a clear view of the main buildings without the glass interfering with it. It took 2 years just to get the glass color right. It also took a while before Pei decided he was going to build a pyramid. He experimented with designing a cube and even a hemisphere. But since the original building doesn't have any curves, this would make the courtyard piece too out of context. So he decided to build a pyramid instead, inspired by the ones in Egypt. After all, the Louvre holds an immense collection of ancient Egyptian artifacts, so that kind of makes sense. Just a wild guess here. The thing is, the French are pretty critical, and once the Louvre pyramid was finished in 1988, it became the center of a very heated debate. Public opinion was unsettled by such a modern construction. Today, people take all kinds of weird selfies with the pyramid, but back then, locals were saying that the modern architecture had nothing to do with the Louvre's Renaissance style, or even the history of the building. Some even said that the pyramid wasn't French enough. Yikes! Standing in line to get inside the Louvre, you can't help but wonder, how do people clean this huge glass pyramid? We're talking glass slopes, so this sure isn't an easy feat. In the beginning, the museum administration apparently hired mountaineers to climb it and clean it. And some still do this job nowadays when the robot built for this task can't clean all the dirty spots off the glass. I'm not joking. The Louvre Pyramid is cleaned by a robot. You know what they say, the future is here. Once you're down the escalators, you'll notice that this awesome pyramid you were taking pictures with upstairs has an inverted face to it downstairs. It serves as a skylight to the Carrousel du Louvre, which is like an underground shopping mall or the museum's main lobby. Hey, look, there's an Apple store, except that the French people pronounce it Eyelets. You'll have the option to choose from 3 different wings of the museum, the Richelieu, Sully, or Denon. I say we begin with Denon. You'll understand why in a bit. Did you know that the Louvre exhibits around 35,000 pieces of art? That's why it's virtually impossible to visit everything in one day. If you're an art lover, you'll have to come back here for more visits. But to see all the pieces of art, spending around 30 seconds on each, you'd have to visit the Louvre over 100 times. And that's not counting restroom and lunch breaks. You get the picture, right? The museum is huge. That's why it takes about a 10-minute walk to get from the lobby entrance to the Louvre's most famous painting, the Mona Lisa. But since you're here early, you managed to take good pictures of this Da Vinci masterpiece. A little known fact, the Mona Lisa was once stolen from the Louvre. It was once stolen at night by a man called Vincenzo Peruggia. He was an employee of the museum, and investigators think he slept inside the Louvre to perform what is known as the greatest art theft of the 20th century. Apparently, the next morning, Vincenzo simply walked out of the museum with the Mona Lisa hidden among his belongings. The Mona Lisa was gone for almost 2 years until the painting was recovered in Italy. Who knows, maybe she enjoyed the trip back to her homeland. If you're an art history buff, you might know that the Mona Lisa has lots of theories revolving around it. The painting is shrouded in mystery, that's a fact. A strong case has been made that the Mona Lisa could be a self-portrait of Da Vinci himself. Historians have compared Da Vinci's face and that of the Mona Lisa, and guess what? They appear to be strikingly similar. Also, a 2010 study done by Italy's Committee for Cultural Heritage found that there is a collection of symbols hidden in the painting. These are only visible through highly technological magnifying lenses, but they showed that Leonardo inscribed an LV inside Mona Lisa's right eye. Experts guess that this is Da Vinci's signature, but the other symbols, a CE in the left eye and a 72 in the arch of the background bridge, are still a mystery. But enough about La Gioconda. We want to get to the Soli wing of the museum. Along the way, you'll see some people sitting in front of paintings with a drawing book or even a canvas. Is that allowed? Yep, this is a very interesting feature of the Musée du Louvre. The museum houses an art school called École du Louvre. The students of this school, as well as other Parisian institutions, can get permits to sit in front of paintings and copy them. This way, promising young artists can learn directly from the source. They copy the works of Renoir, Monet, and Poussin, trying to figure out the techniques these painters used. Can I sign up for this, please? To finish your tour, you're visiting the ancient moat we talked about earlier in this video. You know, the one that was part of the original Louvre when it was still a castle. Thanks to the archaeological excavations that happened in the 1980s, this part was uncovered and has been open for visitation since 2016. You can even see a miniature model of what the original castle looked like. And if you visited other landmarks in Paris, you'll notice that it's pretty similar to the Conciergerie. I wonder if they've ever thought about producing cheese down here. It seems like the perfect place. Oh well, I hope you enjoyed learning some secrets of the world's most famous museum. See you next time!
So, you've just finished your sightseeing tour of Edinburgh, Scotland, or Scotland. It lasted just under an hour, and you're hungry for more. You ask your guide if there's anything else to see, and they start talking about a mysterious underground city. You ask how long it takes to get there, and you're shocked by the guide's answer. You're standing on it. It's right under your feet. South Bridge? But you were just there and didn't notice a giant arrow pointing down. So this is where the mystery starts. The story begins in the mid-1700s. The Scottish capital wasn't as big as it is today. Only 60,000 people lived around Edinburgh Castle. All of them were packed inside medieval walls, and they say today's cities are overpopulated. Get a load of the living conditions back then. The buildings were tall, so there was little natural light. Some houses had 14 stories. Cows walked the narrow winding streets and left stuff. Things were so bad that the famous English writer Daniel Defoe noted, "I believe that in no city in the world so many people have so little room." Yep, that's the guy who wrote Robinson Crusoe. Well, something just had to be done. The solution was to build two long bridges to the north and to the south of the city. The names they gave the bridges were more descriptive than colorful. The bridge to the north was completed first. In 1785, construction on the second bridge got underway. It was going to connect the main pedestrian street in the north with the university buildings in the south of Edinburgh. But don't think of this construction as a modern bridge over a river. It was more of a viaduct, a type of bridge that connects two hills across a valley. The word viaduct comes from Latin, as Romans were pioneers in building these structures. Their capital was built on 7 hills. And just to be copycats, Edinburgh also straddled 7 major hills. Only 2 are visible today because the city has been built up. Now, back in the 18th century, the construction of the South Bridge was a remarkable feat of engineering. It took the builders only 3 years to complete it. 19 stone arches spanned a chasm that was 31 feet at its deepest point, and the length over 1,000 feet. Impressive, even for today's standards. But what does a 2.5 centuries old viaduct have to do with an underground city? Well, it is the city. You see, they designed Southbridge to be hollow on the inside. As you walk along this street today, there is actually a huge human-made cave beneath your feet. The popular name for this set of chambers is the Edinburgh Vaults. But what was the purpose of this space? And is there something or someone there now? Well, let's take it one step at a time. The builder's original intention was for these vaults to serve as merchant shops. At first, it worked out fine. Merchants used a total of 120 vaults as shops and warehouses. There were workshops, cobblers, and taverns. But as time went by, a major design flaw came to light. The stone was leaking, and the vaults were damp all the time. There was even flooding. The builders forgot to waterproof the structure. The merchants feared the water would damage their precious goods. After just a couple of years, the first tenants started moving out. Once legal trade moved away from the vaults, the city's poor moved in. And not only them, but all sorts of shady characters. Historians don't know much about this period, since there are no written records. But even the squatters had to leave soon. If you couldn't do business in these vaults, how could you live in them? It was damp and cold, and there was no ventilation, sanitation, or natural light. It really stunk. Every real estate agent's worst nightmare. Just 30 years after their completion, the Southbridge vaults were abandoned once and for all. But at a street level, business was as usual. The officials decided to fill the vaults with rubble for security purposes. Buried and forgotten, the memory of a once teeming merchant quarter of Edinburgh slowly faded from people's minds. Now, this is where the story gets a bit weird. During the 1980s, a Scottish rugby player accidentally found a tunnel leading into the vaults. The athlete didn't waste any time and started excavating the vaults with the help of his son. Several tons of rubble, and a decade later, the Southbridge vaults have been restored to their former glory, so to speak. They were again dark and damp as they were back in the 1700s. There were many interesting finds in this underground city. The vaults were littered with oyster shells, which were the standard diet for a working-class resident of Edinburgh at the time. Other finds, such as shoes and empty bottles, suggested that people actually lived in these claustrophobic vaults. Think of this the next time you see someone trying to rent their garage as an apartment. So, your guide was right. There really is a hidden city under the streets of Edinburgh. Well, at least one street. You have now gone down from the main pedestrian street into Cowgate. You look up and there it is, the only visible arch of the once impressive bridge. You are now searching online to book a tour of the vaults. You just have to see this place with your own eyes. But the Scottish capital isn't the only city with a mysterious underground. The historic region of Cappadocia in central Turkey hides no less than 36 cities beneath the ground. The biggest and the most impressive one wasn't discovered until 1963. It was built during the Byzantine era to protect the local population from invaders. We have similar structures made out of concrete in our cities, but the level of the Turkish underground city is really impressive. There are several levels, like in a multi-story car garage. The caves and tunnels lie 197 feet underground. That's 2/3 of the Statue of Liberty's height. The city could house 20,000 people at any given time, complete with livestock and food. The smell. Anyway, 20,000 is the average attendance at Major League Soccer matches today. You might want to add a field trip to one of these places the next time you go to Turkey. Most of these cities in Cappadocia can be found in rural areas. Makes sense, right? After all, they were dug out as hiding places. But in Europe, there is one city whose underground labyrinth resembles the vaults of Edinburgh. You've probably heard of Pilsen in the Czech Republic. But hold on a second, this isn't going to be a story of the most famous local product, something brewed, perhaps? It's the story of a medieval city that survived underneath the streets of Pilsen. Water wells, cellars, and passageways stretch for more than 12 miles. Merchants and craftspeople used Pilsen's historical underground for storage. Water, food, ice, you name it. The waterworks are pretty impressive. Historians estimate that 360 wells are located under Pilsen's historical town center. In times of instability, the passageways served as safe havens for the locals. They definitely didn't go thirsty down there. Today, most tourists visit these mysterious underground cities. But in Canada, there's one where people live and work. The construction of Montreal's underground city began in 1962. The initial idea was to shelter traffic. That's a nice way to say that city officials were building a metro station. The idea caught on and the project expanded. Now, it's a real-life urban maze hidden under the downtown area. Need a place to stay? There are hotels down there. Want to grab a bite? Step into one of the underground restaurants. Multiple shops, a library, cinemas, the list is long. There are even residential complexes. But how can people live under the ground? Simple. Although the city itself lies beneath the earth, the access points are at ground level. You can enter the 20-mile-long tunnel network at more than 120 places. Oh, that's another place down under. Oops, sorry, Australia.
This region between Florida and the Bahamas is a famous place for studying various marine life. However, there's a mysterious phenomenon that happens here each year, the reasons for which scientists have yet to figure out. At times, people can see these white clouds appearing on the surface of the water. In technical terms, this occurrence is called a whiting event. With the information they have so far, scientists believe that the white patches may contain particles that are rich in carbon. The Bahama Islands do sit on a big platform of carbon, which stays hidden under the water. Another suggested theory for these unusual clouds is that maybe they're caused by blooms of tiny plants in the water. Scientists have even tried to use pictures taken from above by NASA to at least try to understand the movement of these water vapors. They've figured out that the size of the white patches seems to change with the seasons, with the biggest patches happening from March to May and October to December. The average size of a white patch is about 0.9 square miles. On a clear day, satellite pictures show about 24 patches. Other studies show that these events happen more often in places with considerable amounts of sediments at the bottom of the ocean. It's also possible that some ocean conditions make dirt and minerals float in the water. However, from 2011 to 2015, the patches in the ocean suddenly became almost 4 times larger. But by 2019, they had shrunk back down. It made scientists believe that there might be a 10-year cycle of sorts happening here, but they're not sure what causes it. They've also noticed a connection between the ocean's pH, salinity, winds, and currents. But for now, the data doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not the only secret Earth's oceans keep from us. Have you ever wondered about the deepest part of the ocean? It's known as the Mariana Trench, and it's believed to be around 6.8 miles deep, making it 5 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. The trench was first studied in 1875 with the help of a weighted rope. And in 2012, a Canadian film director reached its bottom using the Deep Sea Challenger submersible vessel. The Mariana Trench is home to some of the most bizarre creatures on the planet, like the Dumbo octopus, sea cucumber, and goblin shark. The trench takes its name from the nearby Mariana Islands, named in honor of Spanish Queen Mariana of Austria. It may be the deepest part of the ocean these days, but there's a lot we still don't know about the depths of our planet's waters. One such intriguing phenomenon is called phantom bottoms. In the 1940s, when sonar became standard equipment, ships and submarines started to detect unexpected signals from areas where no movement should technically exist. It turned out that these signals were coming from a layer consisting of jellyfish, shrimp, and other deep-sea creatures. They rise to the surface at night to feed. Interestingly, these creatures move in a calculated manner, grouping together by species. It's still a mystery to scientists how they managed to do that and why. It was once believed that animals only grouped this way to avoid predators, but the reasons behind the formation of these fake seabeds remain unknown. Recently, the scientific community has acknowledged the existence of a 5th ocean, called the Southern Ocean. This ocean is bordered by 3 of the 4 original oceans and encircles Antarctica and the lower hemisphere, with its borders touching Australia, Southern Africa, and South America. It's a unique ocean, attracting attention and sparking curiosity with its secrets and the creatures it might hold. Rumors of a monstrous creature in these waters have been circulating for some time, and recent research has provided video evidence of strange blob-like fish. The creatures were identified as the sea cucumber with the nickname the headless chicken monster. Although this species has been known since the late 1800s, there's very little information about it, including its count, behavior, and reproductive habits. There are also areas in the world where the ocean literally sparkles. It's not because of the water per se, but because of numerous creatures that have the ability to emit light, known as bioluminescence. This is pretty common among aquatic creatures, with 3/4 of all underwater life being capable of this. Bioluminescence can be found anywhere, from the surface to deep within the sea, even as deep as 2.5 miles. These creatures use light for various purposes. For example, for communicating with their own species, attracting prey, or scaring predators away. The science behind bioluminescence involves the use of 3 chemicals: luciferin, luciferase, and oxygen. This process was first discovered by a French biologist named Raphael Dubois in 1887. If you want to know the difference between real bioluminescence and artificially created light, look for neon blue, green, or red sparkles spread over a large area in the ocean. This can create a captivating and magical effect, much like glitter or stars in the sky. And it's often because of squid, small crustaceans, and algae found in shallow waters. Have you ever heard a strange noise in the middle of the night? Now imagine that, but in the middle of the ocean. There are a few bizarre sounds that have been heard and recorded, like the bloop and Julia. Most experts think they come from big things, like icebergs scraping the ocean floor. But what if that's not the answer? In 1997, scientists were listening to underwater volcano noises in the Pacific using underwater microphones called hydrophones. One day, they heard a very loud and strange sound that was different from anything they had heard before. They called the sound the bloop. They couldn't figure out what was making this sound and thought it could be coming from a secret underwater mission, ship engines, whales, or an unknown sea creature. Years went by, and researchers continued to try and find the source of the bloop by putting hydrophones closer to Antarctica. In 2005, they finally discovered that the bloop was caused by icebergs breaking off glaciers and falling into the ocean. This phenomenon is called an icequake. With Earth's overall temperature rising each year, icequakes are happening more often, causing glaciers to crack and melt into the ocean. Then, on March 1st, 1999, a loud noise was again heard underwater in the Pacific. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration thought it was probably an iceberg breaking too, but the sound was different. This led some people to think the noise came from a sea monster named Julia. Some thought it was a new unknown species, while others believed it was a known creature, like a whale or a giant squid. Some even thought it could be a prehistoric animal. To this day, there's no proof that any of these theories are true. Then there's a story of an island that was swallowed whole by the ocean. It was called Bermeja, and it was a tiny and uninhabited island located at the northwest of the Yucatan Peninsula. Just a century ago, it was known to be located in the Gulf of Mexico, but now it's vanished, leaving everyone puzzled. In the past, Bermeja was frequently depicted on maps created by Spanish explorers during the 16th and 17th centuries. Although its location and name varied slightly, no one ever doubted it existed. However, starting from the 18th century, the island's presence on maps started to fade until it finally disappeared completely. So, what could have happened to it? 3 official investigations were conducted in 2009 with the help of the most advanced technology. But Bermeja remained a mystery. Could it be possible that the island never existed and was simply a fabrication created by early explorers to deceive their rivals? Some people believe that countries made maps with inaccuracies to prevent their enemies from using them. Bermeja could have been one of such fake islands. Other scientists disagree. They claim that there are documents with precise descriptions of Bermeja's existence. They firmly believe the island did exist, but in a different location.
It's strange if you think about it. There are old Roman buildings that have lasted for thousands of years, while our newer buildings seem to fall apart. How did the Romans manage to create such strong buildings? A lot of them with complicated designs, too. Recent research has shown that the Romans used a type of concrete that has an extra layer of protection against the elements. It can even fix itself when it gets wet. This discovery not only explains why these buildings have lasted for thousands of years, but it can also help us make cement in a way that's more natural and resistant. A recent study shows that Romans used volcanic ash in their concrete mix to make it stronger, especially when it was near the ocean, where the air is naturally more humid and could naturally cause more damage. These days, we make concrete out of sand, rocks, water, and a special kind of cement called Portland cement. This cement itself is made by cooking limestone, clay, and other substances in very hot ovens that reach over 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. Sure, it creates a well-blended mixture, but it cracks easily, and sometimes it only lasts a few decades. There's one more interesting feature of this amazing Roman concrete. It has small white bits of calcium called lime clasts that stay inside the concrete and do not disappear over time. At first, it may not seem that attractive because it's not as smooth as the concrete we use today. And for many years, specialists used to think that having small pieces of lime in concrete was a bad thing because they thought it made buildings less resistant. But researchers found out that these tiny pieces actually help the concrete fix itself. I wish I could fix myself that easily. They discovered that when the concrete got cracks, it seemed to magically fill them with a substance called calcium carbonate found in the lime clasts. The Romans made their concrete by mixing sand, volcanic ash, and burned limestone together and adding water. This is called hot mixing. When the water and lime mix together, they have a chemical reaction that makes the mixture get very hot, up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. This also causes those tiny pieces of lime to form. Now, this concrete can get cracks, and when water, rain, or seawater gets in, it makes the calcium in the concrete dissolve. The calcium then sticks to the cracks and makes them close up, kind of like a scab. Of course, researchers had to test this method, and they made concrete as the Romans did. Shortly after, they cracked it here and there. They placed the cracked concrete under water, and after 1 to 3 weeks, the cracks were gone. Safe to say, this didn't happen with concrete made using modern methods. Now, the Romans didn't know the science behind making their concrete strong, but they found a good recipe by trying different things over a long time period. Ancient records show that they used this recipe to build strong structures, especially for ships, and continued to use it once they found it was successful. Now, not all Roman buildings made it to the 21st century in perfect condition. The Colosseum, for instance, one of the most famous Roman constructions in the world, used to be nearly twice as large as it is today. It sustained a lot of damage throughout the ages, reaching the form we've come to know today. Let's not forget, it's a pretty old building to begin with. Its construction started in the year 70 under Roman ruler Vespasian, who later started making motor scooters named after him. You know, Vespa? Nah, I made that up. Anyway, ever since it first opened, the Colosseum was home to a lot of activities and shows, featuring fearless gladiators and a large display of exotic animals, who got to mingle and did lunch together. Unfortunately, it all went downhill in 217 when a fire struck the upper parapets and much of the building's interiors. It took a whole century to finish up the repairs for the damages. Sadly, the initial shape of the Colosseum would be gone forever. A strong earthquake followed, and that didn't help either. This one took place in southern Italy in 443. At this point, a considerable portion of the Colosseum's outer ring was damaged. Soon enough, when locals encountered hardship, they had to rely on selling chunks of limestone from the ancient Colosseum to go by. Another earthquake came in 1349, which gave the Colosseum its most devastating blow. It's when the south side of the building collapsed completely. That's when it started to look more like the building we can see today in the Italian capital. It's not all bad, though. Some pieces of stone that were shaken off the Colosseum were used to rebuild other famous landmarks in Rome. So, if we think about it, the missing part of the Colosseum isn't missing at all. It's just been recycled all around the city. One building that features pieces of old stone Colosseum is called Palazzo Venezia, and it's a local museum. Now, speaking of weird buildings, you've probably seen this one, as it's one of the most photographed spots in the world. You can see online photos of people leaning on it, or ones that make the building look like an ice cream scoop. This famous Italian landmark is called, you tell me. Yep, the Tower of Pisa, and it looks like it's seconds away from collapsing to the ground. Now, should you ever want to visit, you'll need to head over to this Italian city with the same name, Pisa, near the Square of Miracles. Now, weirdly enough, this building is more famous for its awkward incline rather than for its history or purpose. Back in 1178, when the construction of the tower was still not completed, people realized that the building was starting to lean over, and that was before they had reached its third floor. They soon figured out it had nothing to do with the building plans or the materials they used. It was all happening because of the mushy and shifting soil which was beneath the construction. These days, we know that placing a building on top of soil made of clay, fine sand, and shells isn't the best idea. But back then, people didn't know how to figure that out before building something. Now, fast forward some centuries, and it became clear that this 180-foot tower isn't just leaning, it is falling, and at a considerable rate of about 0.08 of an inch per year. Well, that may not sound like a lot, but multiply that by hundreds of years and, well, just look at the pictures and you'll understand. This leaning tower is more than 16 feet off its axis in the present day. So how come it hasn't fallen over altogether? Well, because of physics mostly. Its center of gravity continues to be located within the base of the structure, so it's pretty grounded. It's also been continuously watched over by local authorities to make sure they protect this unique building for as long as possible. The Pantheon is another great example of the way Romans understood architecture. It's also located in Rome and was initially built as a temple. The construction itself was made from concrete with different thicknesses and has an interesting shape too. Back in the day, Romans believed the Earth was like a disc, which was covered by a dome-shaped sky. So they modeled the Pantheon sticking to this idea. Light comes into the temple through a hole in the dome, shining down on the floors and walls, showing the movement of the sun. It's also one of the best preserved ancient Roman buildings. It's no wonder many other buildings have been made to look like it. In the U.S. alone, the U.S. Capitol, the Jefferson Memorial, and the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. are all said to be modeled after this ancient construction. The famous painter Michelangelo was so impressed by this building that he believed some unnatural force must have helped in its construction. The place where it stands is also very special because of the story behind it. Legend has it that the founder of Rome, Romulus, was lifted to the ancient Roman higher spirits on the wings of an eagle from this exact location. Apparently, it was a talon show. Get it? Talons? Eagles? Okay, gotta go.
The Easter Island giant heads are so popular that they even have their own emoji. Their true meaning has been a mystery for hundreds of years. But it looks like we at least know how they were built and transported to their permanent location. The Moai statues consist of 3 parts: a large yellow body, a red hat or top knot, and white inset eyes with a coral iris. Around 1,000 of them were created. The main bodies of most of the statues were made out of volcanic tuff from a local quarry in what used to be a volcano. The material is easy to carve, but not so easy to transport. That's probably why researchers found over 300 unfinished moai back in the quarry. The rest of them stand in various locations, facing the villages as if watching over the locals. So, it looks like the statues were carved lying on their backs. Then, their creators detached them from the rock, moved them downslope, and set them in a vertical position to finish the work. Once it was done, it was time to get the statue to its platform. Now, if you've ever moved houses, you know how physically hard it is. So, imagine having to move a statue that is about half as heavy as a house without a car or any modern equipment for a distance of 3 miles. The locals must have invented some original way of doing it, and scientists tried to recreate it to guess what it was. They tried pulling Moai replicas on wooden sleds. They thought someone could have used palm trees for that purpose, but this theory has been debunked. The most successful experiment so far was wielding ropes to rock the statue down the road in a standing position. This method sounds real because the local Rapa Nui legends mention that the Moai walked from the quarry. And, of course, they needed a good road to get there. In the early 20th century, researcher Catherine Rutledge identified an 800-year-old road network on the island. It was a bunch of pathways around 15 feet wide going from the quarry. She thought that those roads were ceremonial and not built just for the statues. She wasn't a famous scientist back then, so others mostly ignored the theory. Several decades later, famous Norwegian adventurer and archaeologist Thor Heyerdahl published his theory. He mentioned that the roads were built exclusively to transport the Moai, and some of the statues were dropped along the roads for some reason. But in 2010, researchers found that the statues weren't randomly dropped. They actually reached their final destinations as they were all set on hidden platforms. Plus, the road floor was U-shaped, so pulling massive statues along them wouldn't be easy. You can still find roughly 15.5 miles of these roads on the island and see them from satellite images. And it looks like Catherine Rutledge was right about them. The roads were probably built for pilgrims to a sacred volcano, and the Moai standing by them were sort of signposts. Halfway across the world in southern England lies another mystery made of stone, a massive sound illusion, a symbol of unity, a burial ground, or more. Scientists are still debating the purpose of Stonehenge. It took Neolithic builders around 1,500 years to construct this beauty made of roughly 100 stones standing upright in a circle. Millions of tourists come to see it every year, and heritage protectors were worried about the modern road snaking close to the landmark. That modern road is now sunk into the ground below the grass level. And even though archaeologists assumed they could find an older road under it, they didn't have any high hopes. But when they took off a layer of asphalt, they noticed 2 parallel ditches that were nearly perpendicular to the road. The ditches connected the shortened sections of the avenue. That's what the archaeologists call the ancient pathway leading up to Stonehenge. It proves that the ancient people used to visit the monument for their purposes, and probably some ceremonies. Another interesting find during a dry summer was 3 dry patch marks within the stone circle. It looks like they were left there by 3 massive boulders. So Stonehenge could have been a full circle once. In 2021, archaeologists found a Roman road submerged in the Venetian lagoon. The fact that it runs there on the bottom for nearly 4,000 feet is proof that the Romans were here before sea levels rose and flooded the area. It supports the theory that there was an important settlement here centuries before Venice was founded at the spot in the 5th century CE. The ancient Romans were great at many things, and one of them was building roads. And it looks like they weren't afraid to work on the trickiest terrain. Scans have shown that the ancient road was built right on the beach, and it requires some serious skills. Imagine a village from over 1,000 years ago frozen in time. There's still half-eaten food on the tables and personal things left in a rush. It's all preserved so well because it's covered by volcanic ash. Researchers found this village in 2011 in modern-day El Salvador. They believe there was a mass celebration in a Maya village called Seren over 1,400 years ago. The whole village was there, preparing the main temple for a ritual when a nearby volcano erupted. The 200-plus residents had no time to rush back to their homes. To save their lives, they had to flee the plaza and run south on a raised road called Sakbe. They managed to escape from the plumes of volcanic ash. In addition to being a superhero and saving all the people, the road had another cool feature. All Sakbe roads had an outer layer of stones, but this one was made of ash. Ironic, isn't it? It proves that the Maya people didn't only use stones to build their roads. Archaeologists discovered several coins in Jerusalem when they were excavating an old street. When they saw the minting dates, they realized the road was built when Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea. Since he was the local ruler, it's almost clear that he gave the order to build the road. The pilgrims most likely used this road to reach the Temple Mount for worship. The pathway, which was laid with over 10,000 tons of limestone, was almost as broad as a London bus is long. It had been there for 2,000 years. It's not common that you find such a luxurious road, and it's not clear why a Roman governor would spend so much money on the road. It was probably his attempt to make the city's population like him. Plus, it was a great way to show he had both money and influence. The Old North Trail is an ancient highway that the inhabitants of North America used for 10,000 years. First on foot, then with dogs, and finally with horses. The first travelers moved around the continent down its paths for thousands of miles long before the first Europeans arrived, and even during the last ice age. They used it to carry trade goods, visit relatives, find a mate, or just explore. Researchers keep finding evidence that the stories and legends of the Blackfoot Indians about this trail are real. And it could be even the road that served one of the most massive human migrations. The people who crossed from Asia on the Bering Land Bridge about 15,000 years ago and settled in North America might have used the ice-free corridor along the Rockies, which later became a part of the trail. The Nakasendo Highway was built in the 17th century during the Edo period of Japanese history to link Kyoto and Tokyo. The 310-mile-long road runs across mountain ranges and down onto the plain. It was one of the 5 main roads used by the feudal lords and their families to travel to the capital. There were 69 post stations on the route where travelers could stay overnight. The road was built for horses and pedestrians, as the Japanese didn't use carts. You can still walk parts of the route. You've probably heard about the mysterious sea state of Atlantis. It was a high-tech utopia where people lived happily, but then something happened, and Atlantis disappeared from the face of the earth. Many people believe that this city lies at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. But what if we've been looking in the wrong place all this time? What if it's somewhere different from where they're trying to find it? What if all this time Atlantis was in the middle of the Sahara Desert? Well, this unexpected theory has some evidence, but to study this version, you first need to understand what Atlantis was and how we got to know about it. The very first mention of the mysterious city was in 360 BCE. Ancient philosopher Plato wrote about Atlantis. His work, Dialogues, described Atlantis as a rich land with advanced technologies. Its inhabitants were powerful, intelligent, and beautiful, like superhumans. He described in detail the structure of the city, and this was the main reason why many people believed in the existence of Atlantis. According to his records, the Atlanteans built this place in several concentric circles of black and red stone. Then, they covered these circles with brass, tin, and precious metals. In the city, there were water channels on which ships sailed. The Atlanteans were sailors, so they built a passage from their city to the open sea. On the internet, you can find many drawings of Atlantis, created based on Plato's descriptions. Take a look at these drawings and an actual photo of the Eye of the Sahara. This place in the Sahara has a shape of several concentric circles. It looks as if a destroyed city left a trace on the sand. Many people have written online that the lost city was located there, but no one could prove it. Once upon a time, the Sahara was filled with rivers and lakes. In prehistoric times, there was only water there. So far, everything matches. The Eye of the Sahara was first discovered in the 1930s. This place was considered a crater from a fallen meteorite. But in the middle of the 20th century, scientists conducted a soil analysis and refuted the version with a fallen space rock. In the end, everyone agreed that this was a dome of molten rocks under which magma was raging. For millions of years, wind and water had been destroying the formed landscape and eventually made it look like perfect circles. But what if the Atlanteans once came to this place and used natural circles to build a city? In this case, we would have many traces and artifacts from this developed civilization. And yes, archaeologists did find some arrowheads, spears, oars, and other things there. But this has nothing to do with Atlantis. In the Eye of the Sahara, a multitude of Acheulean artifacts lies. It was an ancient tribe that frequented this place. For the first time, Acheulean tools appeared more than 1.5 million years ago. Some of the items found there may be 130,000 years old, and according to the records, Atlantis existed about 12,000 years ago. Archaeologists found no artificial structures in this place. There was also no debris or traces of a large city. People would have found some stuff if a big city with advanced technologies had existed here. The main supporter of this idea was one YouTube channel. It collected 1 million views and attracted the attention of many historians and anthropologists. The theory that the Eye of the Sahara is Atlantis was quickly refuted. People found too many discrepancies between this place and the description of Atlantis. The author tried to catch the viewer's attention by presenting external similarities between the natural landscape and the fictional ancient city. Another popular theory claims that Atlantis was a real continent located off the Bahamas, but then this city was swallowed up by the Bermuda Triangle. According to this legend, the city ruins still lie at the bottom of the triangle, but there's no confirmation of this theory either. Writer Charles Berlitz invented it. Adherents of this theory claim that the walls and streets in the western part of the Bahamas might be the ruins of Atlantis. But scientists disagree. They have proven that these walls are natural formations of coastal rocks. There are also rumors that the story of Atlantis was inspired by an actual historical catastrophe, the Black Sea Flood. This is the Bosporus, a strait in Turkey connecting the Black Sea and the Sea of Marmara. Around 5600 BCE, the Black Sea was twice as small as it is now and had many cities on its shores. Unfortunately, a huge flood destroyed this flourishing civilization. Within a year, cities descended underwater, and surviving inhabitants moved to foreign lands and spread stories about the flood. Maybe these stories inspired Plato to come up with Atlantis. In the 1950s, people came up with another version. Atlantis was the continent that is now Antarctica. Tens of thousands of years ago, a warm continent with a developed city shifted to the northern part of our planet because of the movement of Earth's crust. The Atlanteans couldn't adapt to the cold conditions, and Atlantis was covered with a thick layer of ice. This theory was refuted when scientists began studying the tectonic plate's nature. It turned out that Earth's crust couldn't have moved such a huge continent as Antarctica. The tectonic plates don't behave this way at all. But the main question is, was Atlantis real? No one had described it before Plato. Perhaps the philosopher came up with it. Maybe he did this to emphasize the correctness of his views on life and to identify his philosophical theories. In his works, he wrote a lot about divine and human nature and how people can destroy this nature. He spoke of decaying ideal societies because of immoral behavior and vices. The Atlanteans were once moral, spiritual people who created a utopia, but then they became greedy and mean. They destroyed their inner nature, and for this, they had to witness the destruction of their city. One night, fires and earthquakes hit Atlantis and plunged the city into the sea. The higher powers punished people for their immoral behavior, and Plato also wanted everyone to be afraid of moral decay. But judging by the descriptions of the earthquakes and fire, it may seem that Atlantis was destroyed by a volcanic eruption, as it was with the ancient Roman city of Pompeii. And such destructions have happened pretty often throughout history. Natural disasters ruined many developed cities. One of the most famous cases occurred in 1100 BCE in the Mediterranean Sea, when a volcanic eruption destroyed the highly developed Minoan society. The Minoan society existed for about 2,000 years. These people mostly lived on the islands of Crete and Santorini, located north of Crete. The Minoans had beautiful houses, a sewage system, and a developed economy. They were engaged in agriculture, grew fruits and vegetables, painted frescoes, and made jewelry. They were the first people to found the thalassocracy, an empire based on the sea. They lived off of fishing, piracy, and maritime trade. At the time, they performed cruel rituals, and their way of life was far from moral. They were used to earthquakes on the island of Santorini, so they reinforced the walls of the city with wooden beams, but they didn't know what a volcanic eruption was. And when the sulfur smell appeared in the air, they didn't suspect the impending catastrophe. When the volcano spilled out tons of lava and ash, all the residents of Santorini abandoned their homes and tried to escape, but they couldn't. The eruption and earthquake triggered a tsunami. A large wave flooded the coastal part of the island of Crete. This hit the economy of the Minoans hard and destroyed their port harbor. Then, foreigners attacked Crete and finally destroyed the developed civilization. Some historians think that Plato could have referred to the Minoan Empire when describing Atlantis. Using their example, he showed how immoral actions could destroy people.